think we'll make a start. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Tom Bennett. I'm one of the Vice Chairman of the Planning Applications Committee, and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. To my right are my fellow councillors, and it's the four of us who will be making the decisions this evening. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting on the end.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Wala Idris.
That's what we mean about the feedback. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Councillor Lloyd North, and I'm very proud to represent this ward, Camden Ward.
Emma Dentcode, representing St Helens Ward.
Thank you very much. And to my left is the officer team, led this evening by Jessica Robinson, and the officer team will be presenting the cases and advising us throughout the evening. Before I start on the agenda, I'll just say very quickly that we have quite a full caseload this evening with quite a few speakers. So I'll say both to the committee and to objectors and applicants, let's please all keep our questions and answers to the point so we can proceed as quickly as possible while still considering each case thoroughly. There's also a couple of cases, and I'll flag them up when we get to them, where it's not a full application where considering it's either a discharge of conditions or it's considering, there's three cases at the end where we're considering a difference between the previous local plan and the current local plan. So in those cases, I'll just remind everyone, let's stay on the salient points regarding the conditions and not relitigate the entire case from the beginning where a decision's already been made. So with that said, we'll proceed to the agenda. The first item is apologies for absence. I have one apology from Councillor Adurian, who's unwell, can't make it tonight. There's still four of us on the committee, and the quorum is 3, so that's not a problem. Next item is declarations of interest. So I'm declaring an interest in number 1 Cathcart Road. It's a case I called in and have already expressed an opinion on. So just to err on the side of caution, I'm going to recuse myself from that case. And Councillor Idris has kindly agreed to take the chair for that case. Are there any other declarations of interest? Yes, Councillor Idris.
Yeah, 23 Milner Street, which is the 6th item on the agenda, item S90, is in my ward. However, I haven't discussed it with anyone, and I'm free to.
That's not a problem. And yes, Councillor Dentcode.
Yeah, I just want to say I know several of the objectors, not for the first time. I'm always brutally neutral and even objected to an application from my cousin once, famously, so it was quite a row. But yeah, so no nonsense on that front, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we don't have any minutes to sign off from the previous meeting, do we? I'm not aware of any. No, so no previous minutes to sign off. So we'll now get to the main agenda. I'll just run through the order in which we'll hear the cases this evening. So we always start with the cases where we have registered speakers. So we're starting with number 21 Silchester Road, then number 1 Cathcart Road, then number 60 Slaidburn Street, then number 5 and 7 Stratford Road, number 15 Farmer Street, number 23 Milner Street, then York House at 1 Turks Row, flat 1 and flat A at 76 Cathcart Road, 353 Portobello Road, 136 Oxford Gardens, 152 to 154 Cromwell Road, 225 to 231 Kensington High Street, then the Town Hall, this building, or the Great Hall at the Town Hall, number 19 to 21 Pennywern Road, number 237 to 239 Kings Road, and finally 299 to 305 Fulham Road. So as you can see, it is indeed a very full agenda. further ado, we will proceed to the first case.
Thank you, Chairman. I would first like to draw members' attention to the addendum report. There are 2 minor corrections to the officer report set out in paragraph 3.2 and paragraph 6.14. The application relates to number 21 Silchester Road, which can be seen on this slide with the red arrow. The application site forms a terrace grouping which forms number 13 to number 21A, located to the southern side of Silchester Road. The application before members this evening seeks planning permission for an erection of a single-storey rear extension. The existing and the proposed block plan can be seen on this slide, and I'll draw members' attention to the proposed rear extension in this location here. These are the existing ground and the existing first floor plan, and this is the proposed ground and the proposed first floor plan. The proposed rear extension would have a maximum depth of 5.6 metres and would be 6.2 metres high. This is the proposed rear elevation. Again, members can note the height of the extension here. These are some site photos taken from the rear garden of number 21. So I would draw members' attention to the existing boundary treatment between number 21 and number 21A, and this would be the location of the proposed extension. And then on the image on the right-hand side is taken looking to the east towards number 22 Silchester Road, and members can note the different projection here. These photos are taken from number 21A from the rear garden. Again, I draw members' attention to the shared boundary treatment and the rear garden and this location here, which is where the extension would project from. That concludes my presentation. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions set out within the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got one objector registered to speak. Mr. Thompson, are you with us this evening? Yes, hello. Thank you for joining us. I should have said before we began, each side will get 3 minutes in most cases, unless there's a councillor speaking. So each side gets 3 minutes, and we have to be quite precise on that. So if you go over, I'm afraid I will have to cut you off. But then there'll be an opportunity for a Q&A afterwards. So members of the committee will ask the objectors and the applicants questions. So it doesn't end with your speech. There will be opportunity to answer further questions. So Mr. Thompson, 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you. We are the occupants of 21A Silchester Road, and we're actually here to ask you to adjourn this decision. You'll have seen our objection in the case notes on the application. This application 3262 is actually an amendment to the conditions of a previous planning application 01497. That application was, we believe, granted wrongly because the council failed in its statutory duty to inform us of the plans next door. There was no site notice, nor was there a letter sent to neighbouring properties. We didn't, in fact, find out that this planning permission had been granted until June this year, when we found on the ground, on the pavement, the site notice for these conditions. Through our councillors in Nottingdale, we instigated an investigation which found that we hadn't, in fact, received anything because nothing had been sent. So we got into it with housing and with planning because this application is in fact coming from RBKC Housing via Quinn Studios. And we had an issue with the potential blocking of light that this extension would create. And in fact, in the original case notes for the first planning application, which was granted in April 2023, it does say that 21A Silchester has a habitable window located nearby to the proposed footprint of the extension that would be impacted by the proposal insofar as a loss of sunlight due to the orientation of both dwellings. The planning permission was granted, and considerable, again I'm quoting from the case notes, considerable weight is given to the absence of objections from neighbours. So I think it's fair to say that the Housing Department and Planning realised that there would be an impact, a negative impact on our light, but they carried on because we did not object. We've subsequently had meetings with the planning officer and also housing officers, and it was agreed that a sunlight and daylight survey would be taken. There's also another issue of 2 very dangerous trees in the garden, which I won't go into now. So what we are here to do is to ask you to adjourn this decision until the daylight and sunlight survey has been undertaken by housing, and hopefully the tree survey as well. We suffered a tree falling on our house 2 years ago, so we are quite anxious about dangerous trees. So that's what we're asking, is that this is paused until such time as all the relevant facts and data are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are we joined by Mark Hamilton from RBKC Housing? Mr. Hamilton. Yes, hello. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Hamilton, likewise, you have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Hello, sorry. I don't think I've got anything further to add on the application other than we've followed the procedure through planning. Obviously there were no objections from the planning in terms of the concerns around the height or any impact of the light that this extension would be providing, an impact to the neighbour. So I have nothing further to add on that at this moment in time.
Thank you very much. Right, we now go to questions. Colleagues, who has the first question? Councillor Idris.
Question to the applicant. We haven't done a daylight, sunlight survey, have we?
No, not at this moment in time, no. So
how can we determine if it's harmful or not to the neighbours?
We can't, but judging by typical extensions of this height, there wasn't any concern that this would cause a loss of light or impact. The extension is actually sited below, comes in below the fence height, and the fence height at the boundary is 2.7 metres, and we've got an extension height overall of 2.6. So it actually sits below it at this moment in time. It wasn't something that was raised by planning that we were required or requested to look into getting done prior to the application going in.
So why are we doing it if it's not going to make any difference?
Why are we looking to do it now?
Why are we doing the survey? Yeah.
I suppose it's to look at whether there is actually any further concern, as the neighbours have raised an objection to it.
So if we found there is a further concern after the application has been approved, what are we going to do?
I suppose we would then have to review the design further.
Okay. Thank you.
Colleagues, yes, Councillor Duncode.
Thank you, Chair. What a huge embarrassment. I'm amazed that we've actually come to planning. I mean, surely the whole process of planning, and you're, Mr. Hamilton, you're from housing, I understand, not from planning, is that correct?
I'm from housing, that's correct.
Okay, so it's the whole planning process is not part of your remit.
No, it's not.
So you're just looking at it from the housing point of view.
Absolutely.
Which isn't the remit of this committee, is something completely different, and
that's correct.
Clearly from what we gather and the evidence that has emerged, the whole process hasn't the correct process hasn't happened.
Hasn't been followed.
It hasn't, but with respect, it seems to me that you're saying that it wouldn't matter because it wouldn't make any difference whether, so you kind of, I just understand that you're making some kind of assumption that it wouldn't make any difference. On what basis do you make that assumption when planning isn't your expertise?
I'm a building surveyor, so from doing previous applications in the past, a single story wouldn't usually cause a significant effect or on light to a neighbouring property.
Okay, but that's an assumption, and actually the purpose of this committee
that's assumption based on my professional opinion.
So. Yeah, so I mean, the purpose of planning is to decide on that.
Absolutely.
Not to have somebody else decide on that. I'm so shocked, honestly, Chair.
Councillor Denko, we asked Mr. Thompson a question and he answered it. I think it's reasonable for him to give his opinion, and then it's up to us as a committee.
Hamilton is my surname.
Sorry, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Thompson's over there. And then it's up to us as a committee to make the decision, of course.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Just have a quick question for Mr. Thompson. Yes, given that the process wasn't followed here, which is obviously deeply regrettable, and I understand there is sort of an ongoing complaints process looking into that. So yeah, that is regrettable. But that aside, what are your thoughts on Mr. Thompson's comment that the fence is higher than the extension, so therefore it's very unlikely to cause any overshadowing?
We would actually contend, on the basis of a site visit that happened on the 5th of September, we would contend that actually the extension is slightly higher than the fence, and also that the fence is a trellis, so light floods through the fence as it stands. Okay, understood. Colleagues, any other questions? No. Okay. In which case we move to the next part of the meeting, which is questions to officers. So I'll start. So, given that the process wasn't followed, and I think it's been accepted now that the process wasn't followed properly on the initial application, did we consider adjourning this, or at least reconsulting to allow objectors to make the comments that we've heard?
Thanks, Councillor. So you're correct, and as picked up as part of the officer report, the council have failed as part of the original application to fulfil their statutory duty. That application was granted, that decision hasn't been revoked, so at any time it could be implemented. This application is a Section 73 to vary those conditions. Officers have assessed it based on the information provided, and as set out within the report, we're satisfied that it wouldn't have a detrimental impact in relation to living conditions. That's due to the site, the scale of it, the height of it, its siting and its relationship with the boundary. So officers don't consider that a daylight and sunlight report would be necessary for the scale of this application. If members felt that a daylight and sunlight report was necessary, then you would need to consider that further, whether it would need to be deferred or refused on that reason.
So just to follow up on that, and I do appreciate that what's in front of us tonight is a variation of the conditions rather than the full application, but would it not be the case that the process not being followed and us not fulfilling our statutory duty could be a grounds for an appeal? or a review against the granting of planning permission?
So when the original application was granted, there could have been a period that it could have been judicially reviewed. I believe that period has now expired, and it hasn't been judicially reviewed, and as I say, the decision hasn't been revoked. So as set out in my report, we have given that limited weight in this instance, and we have assessed it afresh, and officers still consider that a single-storey rear extension in this location is acceptable.
Colleagues, any further questions? Yes, Councillor North.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a very obvious question here. Would it not have been prudent to pull this case before it came to committee?
Thank you for your answer, for your question, sorry. So officers were satisfied that we had all of the evidence and all of the details needed to make an assessment. We didn't request the submission of a daylight and sunlight report, and therefore there was no reason to withdraw this application or push this application to a different committee.
I'm feeling a bit of unease amongst the committee about this case. I think the likelihood is that probably, when the sunlight report comes back, probably will be acceptable, but we can't know that for certain until it's done. And given that it's our council as the applicant, we need to go above and beyond to do right by our residents. So I'm thinking colleagues would be happy if I did propose an adjournment on this case until that daylight sunlight report has come back. Is that correct?
If I may, absolutely, and obviously, if the period to object has passed, but the objectors didn't know, so that's hardly fair. I'm very uncomfortable about officers making decisions because I think it would be okay, and we could be facing a very, very expensive appeal, which is also something we should think about because it seems a complete mess, frankly. I'm also surprised that it's actually here at committee. In 18 years on planning, I've never encountered anything like this.
Sorry, Councillor Idris. Yes.
Yeah, I'm unclear whether it is better to adjourn it or defer it, which is more or less the same thing, or refuse it. And I'm curious to know the difference between the three actions legally and what can we do? Because I feel unclear. I feel this application should not come to committee to start with, as Councillor Lloyd said.
Yeah, I think if you feel it shouldn't have come to committee, then a deferral or an adjournment, which is the same thing, I believe, would be appropriate. If we were to refuse it, it would be to say that we believe that this application in front of us is unacceptable, and that would in itself create a precedent. And I don't think that's what we're saying. We're not saying it's necessarily unacceptable. We're saying that we want it to be delayed whilst the sunlight report comes back, whilst the case is reviewed. So I don't know if officers would like to add anything on that, but would it be appropriate at this point for me to propose a deferral?
I just wanted to clarify something, if I may. The daylight and sunlight report, would members like that to be solely on 21A Silchester Road, or would they like the report to include 21A and 22, which is the adjoining property to the east?
Both? Yeah. Both the neighbours on either side.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, in which case I will propose a deferral. Can I see all those in favour? Right, so that's unanimous for a deferral. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who joined us for that case. We now proceed to number 1, Cathcart Road, at which point I will have to recuse myself and hand the chair to Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to draw members' attention to the committee addendum report, which includes amendments to the officer's report to reflect the updated new local plan policy wording and the acceptance of a fire strategy which has been reviewed by officers and deemed to be acceptable. Therefore, the third reason for refusal has been removed. This is an application for planning permission for the demolition and redevelopment of the existing house and a construction of a replacement dwelling, along with landscaping and associated works. This application is recommended by officers for refusal for the reasons set out in the officer's report, but in summary, the two key issues are the detailed design and form of the proposed building, along with light overspill from the installation of excessive glazing. The site is a two-storey property with a lower ground floor level, which is located on the corner of Cathcart Road and Redcliffe Road. Number 1 Cathcart Road, along with the adjoining building, number 33 Redcliffe Road, are a pair of 1950s houses. The site is identified as a neutral building within the Bolton's Conservation Area appraisal. Members should also note that the principle of demolition has been accepted at this site previously, but this is subject to an appropriate replacement building. This slide shows a photograph of the existing building. Members will note that the building is positioned next to villa-style dwellings along Cathcart Road. This slide shows the existing rear elevation. This slide shows the existing front elevation. And this slide shows the proposed front elevation with the new windows, hipped roof, and relocated front door. Members will note that number 33 Redcliffe Road on the end is to remain as existing. This slide shows the existing and proposed front elevation against the context of the neighbouring buildings along Cathcart Road. Members will note that the villa-style properties are number 3, 5 and 7 Cathcart Road. This slide shows the existing rear elevation. And this slide shows the proposed rear elevation, and members will note the additional glazing which would be incorporated onto the rear elevation, along with solar panels at the roof level. This slide shows the existing roof of the building, which is flat with a modest-sized overrun in the centre. The proposals would introduce a hipped roof with 6 skylights and solar panels to the rear roof slope. This slide is also helpful in that it shows the curved form of the rear extension, which would include a green roof and additional skylight. And this slide shows a visualization of the proposed development and how the new dwelling would be perceived in the street scene against the wider context along this side of Cathcart Road. I've also included these two final slides, which include the details of the materials which would be used. These include Portland stone on the facade with bronze metal framed windows, a slate roof with a stone podium at the base. At the rear elevation, Peterson brickwork is also proposed along with metal framed windows and stone banding between the floor levels. Officers have recommended refusal for the reasons set out in the officer's report, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
We have a councillor speaking for the applicant and 3-4 agents. Can I ask Councillor Rossi to speak? And you have 2 minutes to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have spoken before at planning committee meetings about other applications, but this is the first time that I have spoken in favour of an application, and I do so as I feel that this proposal is the best for the neighbourhood. As you know, planning permission has already been granted for this site for a pastiche Victorian villa mimicking the 3 that it abuts. This proposal, which has been agreed, is much larger than Mr. Naylor Leyland. It requires digging a basement under the garden and an underground swimming pool. The granted application will take approximately 18 months longer to build, and it will cause far more disturbance to neighbours. I am not an architect or a town planner, but I would have thought that all buildings reflect the era in which they were built, unless they're copying an earlier one. And this is itself not a sufficient reason to keep the buildings as they are. The two buildings built in the 1950s as a result of World War II bombings are not particularly attractive and have not used particularly good materials. Permission has already been granted to knock one of them down. I am very familiar with this road as it lies within my ward, and I cannot see how the proposed modest building using excellent building materials will cause harm to the Bolton's conservation area. Cathcart Road does have 3 Victorian villas, but beyond that, there is a whole cornucopia of styles built at different times. It is not a uniform or symmetrical street. So I appeal to the committee to grant this modest, more modern application, which will cause far less disturbance to residents. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the rest of the agents.
That's me.
So how many people are speaking?
2 of us are going to speak. It's myself and Mr. Naylor Leyland, who's the applicant. The other 2 gentlemen are here to answer questions, the architect Philip Ganuccian.
Okay.
And the
you have 3 minutes between you, divided whichever way you want to.
Yeah, thank you very much. I shall do primarily with the conservation design issues, then touch on the lighting issue that's been raised, and end on some planning benefits. This is a scheme that's been designed by Philip Ganuccian, who is a well-known architect, and I worked with him on a number of conservation-led modern designs, and he's got an excellent reputation. He's been assisted by Paddy Hugh, who is a conservation expert. The existing building is designated in the CAP statement, Conservation Area Statement, as a neutral contributor, and therefore in policy terms, demolition can be allowed if the replacement building preserves and enhances the conservation area. It's not a great piece of architecture, and there wasn't a particularly well-known architect who designed it. The new building, in contrast, I believe will be an elegant addition to the conservation area and has the positive features of buildings in the conservation area, such as a symmetry in its design, a better balance of vertical and horizontal lines, and a plot width which is the same as other buildings in the conservation area. Officers have raised 4 points about the design. Firstly, the roof, but the character of the conservation area is, in roof terms, design is defined, in my view, by pitched slate roofs, which is exactly what we proposed. When you look at the images, I don't believe that it's ill-proportioned in relation to the base of the building, and there are many modern buildings in the borough which have slate roofs. Next concern was height, but again, I don't think it dominates. It is respectful to the adjoining property at number 3 and creates a better transition with the retained building than the extant consent that's been referred to. Thirdly, materials. This is an area with considerable variety. Portland stone is a very high quality material. I think when you look at the images, the colour, the texture and the scale of that, it fits in well. And in many respects, it's rather like stucco, which was meant to imitate stone, which is a dominant feature in the borough, in the conservation area. And lastly, the cornice detail. A detailed plan has been submitted to show how that would work and retain the gaps with the neighbouring buildings. So turning to the fire strategy, which has been dealt with, and the lighting, we are happy to set a condition to deal with the issue relating to lighting, and we did indeed look at reducing the skylights, which I think are the main issue with the officers. However, we don't believe, from our analysis, that that's going to cause harm, but we're very happy to look at it again. Finally, in terms of benefits, the reduced basement will significantly reduce construction impact. It's a high-quality design which will turn a neutral into a positive contributor, and it's very much more sustainable than either the existing or proposed or exempt consent.
You have 15 seconds left.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. I bought the house a year ago for it to be a house for my future. So it was my home rather than what was our home. One winter there has proved to me that an uninsulated building is not suitable to be lived in. I believe I've assembled an outstanding team with considerable experience in the conservation area to advise me, And I believe they've designed a house that both suits my needs and is sympathetic to the varied street.
I have to stop.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we move to the objector, and you actually have 5 minutes, and let me do the math here, 5 minutes and 20 seconds to speak.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of the owner of 3 Cathcart Road. We believe that there's a further reason for refusal other than those given by the officers, and that is that the building should not be demolished. We don't agree with the statements that have been made by the officers in their report. The 2 statements that have been made are, firstly, that the principal demolition has been accepted in the previous consents in 2020 and 2010, and therefore there remains no objection to the principle of demolition. And secondly, that in this case the site is neutral, and so demolition is accepted. Just because demolition was judged to be acceptable in 2010 and 2020 under the planning policy of the time, it does not mean that demolition is acceptable under the new 2024 policy. In this case, the subject building is both of historical and architectural merit. Number 1 was designed by an architect, Richard Pollock, in 1951-1952. Pollock is cited in the Survey of London as being responsible for the design of some post-war modernist architecture houses at Cathcart Road, Redcliffe Road, and is specifically referred to in Chapter 11 of Little Chelsea and Kensington for these post-war rebuildings. He's listed under architects in the UK Modern House Index for houses of architectural interest from the 1920s, and is known for designing the 1950s modernist architecture housing at Ellerslie Close in London. So Mr. Pollock is an architect of some note. Number 1 was constructed in 1951-52 in place of buildings damaged during bombing that took place during World War II. And for that reason, we believe that it makes a valuable contribution to the history and character of the borough and the Bolton's conservation area. At a wider level of significance, it makes the same contribution to the history of London and the impact of World War II. Preservation of historic and significant buildings is something that runs strongly through policies CD3 and CD4. This conservative approach is expanded in policies CD4, D2 and D3. Demolition is to be resisted where a building or structure makes a contribution to the character of the area and where the harm outweighs the public benefits. We suggest that there is little or no public benefit in demolishing number 1, rather it would be a disbenefit. The heritage interest of number 1 would be lost for this and further generations. We believe the decision should be made on this application now, which makes it clear that under current planning policy, number 1 should not be demolished. Turning to the conservation area. The existence of these post-war houses in Cathcart Road and their history is recorded in the conservation area appraisal itself. And there is a substantial group of 1950s buildings at the east end of the road. Collectively, they tell the historically important story of the effect that World War II had on London. At paragraph 6.38 of the local plan, it is clear that partial or full demolition of a building such as number 1 can cause irreversible damage to the character and appearance of the townscape, even if it is not listed. It says that as heritage assets are irreplaceable and that any harm or loss requires clear and convincing justification. The proposal adds a confusing and incongruous element to the local street scene to the detriment of the conservation area. It would add a jarring element to this part of Cathcart Road and would do nothing to enhance the rhythm of the development in this part of the conservation area. We urge committee members to refuse this application on the grounds of the inappropriateness of the design. Thank you.
Now we move to the second part of this meeting, and does any of the councillors have a question? Yes, Councillor Denko.
Thank you. I'm quite a fan of 1950s modern movement buildings and have seen many for over the years, some being conserved and some being updated and reused and so on. Given, I'd like to address the architect, if I may. Given the objection to the building being knocked down and replaced by a sort of pastiche, as the other villas are, which I quite understand, I'd like to understand the rationale of just doing a kind of half job almost, I think, because obviously the original 1950s building on the corner will still be there, and this one will be kind of in between, and it does, I just don't understand how that's going to work. Perhaps you could just talk through your rationale a bit, because I'm confused here.
Thank you. So basically it's a terrace of 3 houses, 2 that actually sit on Cathcart Road but appear like one. It's quite complicated to understand where the front door is. The front door to the Redcliffe Road, which is the second of the 3, is actually on the end of Cathcart Road. So in terms of how one approaches it, first of all I look obviously at the brief, and I look at the condition of the house. And the house is made up of a lower ground floor, a ground floor and a first floor. Currently the lower ground floor has a ceiling height which is broken by a beam at 1.9 meters, which basically is below par accommodation. I can't raise the ground floor any higher because we're already going up 6 steps, so that's impossible. So I need to adjust all the structure. When I started looking at pulling the building apart, it was impossible because it's partly concrete, partly timber, etc., etc. It's also totally uninsulated, including the ground slab. So the ground slab would have to come up to insulate that, but then create not enough headroom. Going on, it's got a rather, they've put the staircase without any viewing at all onto their own garden. So it's blocking the garden from the inside of the house. So I think for many, many reasons, I find the house itself not a positive house. Not least the bedrooms are on the top floor. So I reimagined it for my client because of his particular needs. He only needs 2 or 3 bedrooms. And I'm putting his accommodation, his main accommodation, living accommodation, kitchen and dining on the top floor, because that has more light and is actually, could be a very beautiful space up there. The lower floors are converted for bedrooms and bathrooms, etc. We were able to put in a ground source heat pump, so we make the whole building from scratch in a very sustainable, contemporary way. And then we have to consider how we go back to the outside of the building, which I think concerns us perhaps the most. We're looking at how the remnant of the 1950s building sits perfectly well on Redcliffe Road and actually terminates on that, with the entrance to the Redcliffe Road one. We need to try and make a bridge between the 50s building and the villa next door, which is taller, more dominant and more beautiful. So I've kind of tried to...
Subjective, yeah.
So I'm trying...
Can I just interrupt and... what I'm
Yes.
really trying to understand, given the objections to this and the conservation area and the fact that this building was neutral and so on, is the refusal, if that's fair to say, of preserving the integrity of the building as it is, and what you're saying about having a bridge in between. I can't follow that, because we've got one beautiful building and then a building which may not be your taste but has its own integrity, and in the middle you're doing something which is not one or the other. Well, so I'm just trying to get my head around that. Yeah,
of course. It's a building made up of 3 terraces, 3 terrace houses put together. The more articulated facade is on Redcliffe Road of the buildings. When they came and did it, they applied... I've just been prompted there in terms of also comparing it to the consented scheme, which is a much taller building, which leaves a very incongruous end. This, because I've kept the same street, the height of the street facade, it actually very much sits within the envelope of the 1950s building, which in a sense carries the history of the bomb damage. When we walk around Kensington and Chelsea, we see new buildings.
I think I'm with you. Thank you. Thanks for your response.
we'll move to any questions to officers? Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. My question, two questions to the officers. The first question is the history of this site. Clearly it was previous, are we right to assume it was previously a villa, as is next door at number 3? No.
Sorry, as in the planning history for the site in terms of its demolition and then reconstruction as a villa style? Yes, that was permitted in 2022. So the principle of demolition has been...
No, sorry, I didn't make my question clear. Before the war, before it was demolished by the Luftwaffe, was there a villa on this site?
No.
Because my second question is about the conservation area, and if we are to, if you're saying that this adds to the conservation area.
So to answer your first question, there was no villa previously at the site. It was the existing 1950s building. And then in terms of its contribution to the conservation area, it is identified as a neutral building. But because the principle of demolition has been established previously, officers have given weight to that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to officers? Okay, well, we have a case here where the local councillors called it in because they think the proposed offering is acceptable and it goes with in line with our local plan. But we have a gentleman here objecting to it on the ground that the 1950s building also have its own integrity and its heritage and should be respected accordingly. And it's only 3 of us, so if so we need to make a decision. I don't know, do you guys have a feeling one way or the other? Emma?
For once, I'm going with the officers definitely on this. I say it's neither one thing nor the other. It's destroying the integrity of the 1950s building, which does have its own integrity. Whether or not people like it, that's something else, but it does have its own integrity. And it's certainly not, I don't think, the idea that it's a kind of bridging building when it's neither one thing nor the other, I do think it looks really strange, and I couldn't possibly switch. So I'm going with the officers for once.
Lloyd?
Gosh, I can't believe I'm saying that I'm agreeing with Councillor Dent-Code, but I do actually agree with Councillor Dent-Code, because you're going to have a situation here where you're going to have a part 1950s and a part something different that goes with nothing else on the street, and then the original Victorian villas. So my gut feeling on this is, as a conservation area fan, is that this will be neither one or the other. So I'm minded to go with the officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we... Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in because I think you have mentioned some points which may not be covered within the officer's report. So I wanted to make sure that you were comfortable with the reasons for refusal that are listed and you didn't want to expand on them at all given the nature of your discussion here this evening. I think what I've maybe picked up on is that you are not supportive of the demolition in principle aspect, and maybe you are finding the building to be a positive building, and therefore I just wanted to make sure that we're covering that within the reasons of refusal we've put forward for you to consider.
Okay, well, my feeling is I'm a bit in between, but I agree with Councillor Lloyd in the fact that now instead of having 2 different styles on the street, now with this building we'll add a 3rd style, and it is not a row, it is just one building from 1950s, one building circuit, and then these 3 lovely villas. And to me, I think that goes against what the conservation area should be and should look like. That's my opinion. So shall we put it to a vote and take it from there? Are those this is going to be interesting. Let me read here. It says it is recommended the committee refuses planning permission for the following summarized reasons. And the reasons are, I don't need to read them all, you know what the reasons are. So those in favor of refusing planning permission, can I see a show of hands? And I guess no opposing, no abstention. Yeah, thank you. It's refused, and based on the points that you stated. Can we add, because there is already isn't there already a planning granted for demolition? Does that trump what we decide today?
Would you mind if I came in? Thank you, Chair. So I think what you could propose potentially is widening one of the reasons for refusal to include demolition if you thought that the existing building was a positive contribution to the conservation area, and that would go against the officer's assessment of the proposal in the officer's report. So that would be, you would have come to a different conclusion to what we reached on the previous application and in this one. So you could propose to extend,
Chair, may
widen.
I add, the objector came up with some very good points about the history of the 1950s building, and we should be treasuring all. And those buildings can be updated without actually ruining the integrity of the building and the style and the design. They have their own design, and we have quite a few around the borough. They are also part of our history, so I think that was quite important. If you agree.
I'm trying to ascertain is the existing permission for demolition. That can go ahead anyways. Is there any way to stop it from going ahead at this stage?
No, we can't. We can't do that. No, okay. You can only make a decision based on the application in front of you today.
Okay. All right. That's all I'm saying. Okay. All right. Thank you. So then we stick with the refusal and the reasons as stated in the report. Yeah. Okay. And I think I can hand back to Tom, who's not going to be very happy with me.
Right, we now move on to number 60, Slaidburn Street.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to draw members' attention to the addendum report and provide a verbal update to correct the number of additional representations received. So instead of 4 representations received, we've received 3. This is an application for planning permission for the replacement and renewal of the existing main roof covering on the building, which includes increasing the height of the main roof sections by approximately 200 millimetres to install a new insulation and system build-up coverings. The site is a 4-storey mixed-use building with commercial units at the ground floor facing towards Kings Road and 10 flats in the upper floors. The site is within the Sloane Stanley Conservation Area. This slide shows a photograph of the existing building along with current scaffolding which is in place. This slide shows the existing roof covering, and this slide shows the proposed roof covering. This slide shows the existing elevation facing onto the Kings Road, and this slide shows the proposed elevation facing the Kings Road. Members will also note the additional 200 millimetres at the roof level, which is the increase in height of the roof which would accommodate the insulation. The existing render at the roof level is also proposed to be repainted, and the new roof would be finished in dark grey to match the existing. This is another existing elevation facing Slaidburn Street. And this is another proposed elevation showing the rise in the roof level from from that elevation along Slaidburn Street. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we have 3 objectors registered for this case, but I believe we've agreed due to special circumstances that a statement will be read out on their behalf. Who is reading that out? Is that you, Jessica?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Unfortunately not. That will be Jerome in government.
Oh, excellent. Jerome, over to you.
We are back 10 months after conditions were attached to approval for windows to discuss a planning application for the roof under the same major works project. Roof replacement is the first task on the critical path before other work can begin. Amber construction started on site in July 2024 without planning permission or an active application, which is unacceptable. It is week 12 of the 25-week contract and no major work has started. This is almost 4 years since RBKC consulted. The RBKC consultation began in November 2020. The 35-year-old mastic asphalt roof fibre board roof was surveyed as water saturated and rotten in 2021. Amber stated it was not being stripped, which could cause problems when the new roof is fitted. According to the schedule of works, it should be stripped. Flat roof area 6 has been covered in over-engineered scaffolding, preventing access for roof renewal. Scaffolding also covers access points for redecoration. Emergency fire exit is prevented by fixed mesh scaffolding panels in front of all walkway escape routes, leaving the entrance door as the only emergency exit. RBKC have been absent, delegating major works decisions, responsibility and leaseholder engagements to Amber Construction for when they started on site. RBKC exclude leaseholders from major works meetings, information requests and answers to questions. This planning application is flawed. It does not contain measurements or cross-section drawings of exact height increases, curb materials, edges or accurate measurements required for flat roof areas 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6 that do not have parapet walls to hide roof height increases. Insulation type and fire retardancy is not specified, and RBKC have not consulted residents on roof replacement alternatives. No bio-solar green materials were provided, as they were for other flat roof properties. This is a once in a 30-year missed green roof opportunity that will not come again until 2050. There are new handrails being installed to the roof area, which are not included in the planning application. In conclusion, precise curb heights and materials for the non-parapet walls should be stated in the application. Not doing so could set a negative precedent for increased roof height in the conservation area. Please can the following actions be completed before planning permission is granted? Specific leaseholder consultation and communication for roof and major works. Remove major works decision making from Amber to a new RBKC team. Provide bio-solar roof options. Provide specific measurements and drawings of curb details for roof areas 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6 and insulation to flat to all roof areas. Include flat roof area 6 omitted from this planning application and the new handrails. Correct unspecified over-engineered scaffolding according to the schedule of works. And lastly, investigate scaffold estimate £126,000 with site setup and prelims totalling £206,000 over half the £410,000 contract. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe we have 4 people registered for the applicant, presumably on behalf of RBKC. Kwasi Agyapong, Ellie Achilleus, Jerome Bloom and Andrew Trander. Are you with us? Ah, fantastic. Will you have up to 3 minutes between you whenever you're ready?
Thank you. My name's Andrew Trander. I'm from Capital PCC, and we've been appointed by RBKC to undertake consultancy services from RBI A stages 0 to 6. Site surveys with specialists have been undertaken to the roof. This includes moisture mapping, specification proposals and proposed drawings. The works to be undertaken at 60 Slaidburn are in general external enveloping such as windows, roofs and external facades remediation. The roof works proposed are to bring the current roof system up to the latest standards as highlighted in Part L of the building regulations. This presentation will display the current condition of the roof, our current proposals for remediation, as well as outline any aesthetic changes to the building. So the existing roof covering has significant water ingress issues across the roof, which is entering the flats below, causing mould and damp issues, making them uninhabitable. Evidence of numerous previous patch repairs across the entirety of the existing roof covering, which appear to have not solved the water ingress issues. The current roof system falls well below Part L of the building regulations, as it contains no insulation and offers minimal thermal performance. Multiple block drains and drainage issues, combined with the insufficient full gradients of the existing roof covering, have exacerbated the water ingress problem. Notable ponding visible to roof covering and persistent rainfall. The outline roof proposals. Complete strip removal of the existing roof covering, complete any repairs to the exposed concrete deck, install curb details to the roof perimeter as per the proposed Bowder specification and proposed drawing provided within the plan application. Begin installing the roof covering and build up and install capping sheet as per the Bowder specification. The roof covering will be inspected by Bowder and signed off once complete as per specification. Roof materials are included within the Bowder specification and provided with the planning application. The aesthetic performance. The current roadside render below the roof is also primed and re-rendered. With this new roof system, the roof height will increase by 150 to 200 millimetres to allow for the insulation. This will be a build-up of a white UPVC fascia board of 150 millimetres and black GRP trim of 50 mils to match the current aesthetic of the building. The insulation will be 140 thickness, which will achieve a 0.15 U value, which is better than the 0.16 requirement as part of the regulations. The top capping sheet of the roof system is fire retardant as per the Bowder specification. The Bowder roof system will be guaranteed for 25 years following the sign-off. That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions to the objectors or applicants? Yes, Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at some of the objections, there's one that stands out that says that there wasn't adequate consultation. I noticed on the report that 25 properties were notified, which resulted in 7 objectors. Can you confirm that adequate consultation took place on this case?
Yes, we did give plenty of notice to have a talk with the residents and the shop owners below the building. We held a residents' consultation even before the work started. There was one a couple of weeks ago that no one attended as well. So, yes.
Sorry, just to clarify, you said there was 2 drop-ins sent, and the first one was attended, the second one wasn't attended?
Yes, 2 weeks ago there was one which no one attended, which we all turned up and no one turned up. So.
And you're quite confident that enough notice was given, there were notices sent through letterboxes and posted on the notice board?
As I understand, we gave 2 weeks notice prior to the meeting, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Denkade.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, apart from what Councillor North just said, it seems the whole thing's rather messy, that they're confused about, they're upset about the process and that things haven't been done correctly. Yeah, it doesn't look great, but as far as you're concerned, you don't. I mean, your consultations, for example, sometimes people put them on during the day when people are out to work. What time are your consultations? I mean, this is just one thing that comes up regularly with council tenants and leaseholders.
Yeah, we've done it in the evening. 5 o'clock? 5 to 6:30. We gave
5 to 6:30 when most people, if people are working,
yes.
then they wouldn't be home by then. Okay, no, I understand. Yeah, I mean, there's often a mismatch that people don't understand, like a lot of council officers don't understand that people do actually work during the day. Okay, it does seem, it seems a bit chaotic from the feedback from residents. Is there something that you're proud of, or is it COVID has got in the way, and things have got delayed, and the scaffolding up for too long and so on? What can you say about that?
Could you, sorry, just repeat that?
It seems that the whole process has been rather messy. Can you say that, you know, did COVID have a part to play in this or not? It's also
no, I don't think COVID had anything to do.
Okay.
That was a bit before my time. I mean, we've given plenty of notice to this project, I believe.
Can you comment on the scaffolding at all? The current use of scaffolding? You may need to inform them, because I can't answer that.
Okay, not to worry, you weren't there. All right, thank you.
Chair. Anything else to add on
Yes.
this point? Yes, go
Chair,
ahead.
thank you. I picked up this project about a year and a half ago, and from all the records that I've seen, this roof has been a subject of discussion over a long period of time, way back to 2018. So I'm a little bit surprised that people are saying that there's not been enough consultation. I believe that when Bauda inspected the roofs, they had discussions on site with some of the residents. Since I picked this up, we've had meetings, which some residents have attended. We had the drop-in session. We had the contractor meeting. We have set up site, and we have always written to residents and said, come in, see us, come and ask questions, come and have discussions. I did a walkabout with Councillor Kim Taylor-Smith about a year ago, where we spoke to a lot of the residents. We went to look at the whole building. So I think we have done enough consultation. We have written to residents. We have given them the whole pack of schedule of works that we're going to do. So I don't see any surprises either way.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's helpful. Yes, two more questions. Councillor North and Councillor Idris.
Can I just clarify, the three people that are registered to speak, are they in the chamber and allowed to speak? Or
Yes. Yes.
Are we allowed to ask them
Yes,
questions?
absolutely. They're registered.
Thank you. So, to the objectors, is Richard Briggs here? I'm looking for your letter that seems to suggest that the planning committee has been blackmailed. Could you explain that?
Good evening. Yes, in my opinion, the very fact that the scaffolding has actually been put in place on the assumption that you will simply rubber stamp what the housing department has requested, essentially puts you in a compromised position of being held to ransom, that if you don't approve this, then RBKC will incur a series of additional costs.
That's not answering the question.
And I'm very concerned about the optics of that. I'm very concerned about, I've never encountered an application that has actually put all of the scaffolding up before permissions have been granted. I've never come across that before.
Quite often we do have retrospective applications made. But I just wanted to clarify that point because you put it in writing.
Just very quickly, just to say on behalf of the committee that we feel absolutely no pressure in either direction based on the existence of scaffolding or otherwise. But yeah, just make that clear. Do you have another question, Councillor North? Oh no, Councillor Idris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is to the applicant. Can you explain to me, there is concern about the height and the size of the wall that you're adding, and also could you tell me what type of material are you using?
Hello. Yes, so basically it's an uninsulated roof currently. It will be 140 mil of insulation plus the weathering sheet. Because of the current falls, it effectively falls away from the street, from the front, towards further back in the building. So the highest point going to the current gullies is at the front, is on the street side. 200 mil is the maximum that we wanted to put in for planning, because there's every chance that it's less than that. But the Bowder did want us to give it a bit of a kick, a detail on the edge, a little batten detail, just to encourage water to drain back and not to come down the front of the facades to make it dirty, being that it has a white strip at the top. As far as materials are concerned, it's a reinforced felt onto a PIR insulation and a reinforced felt vapor control membrane. It's a fully warranted Bowder system. They do fully A-rated equivalents, but that would push up the insulation further in thickness. You should be advised of that. Any other questions on the materials?
No, all done. Okay, yes, one more.
Sorry, one quickie. I know that the objectors have also raised the option of a green roof. Now, it's kind of a material one. Was that, and I know that's not the plan in front of us at the moment that we're deciding, but just out of interest, was that ever a consideration? Would that be something, or would that be a cost element on this case?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think green roofs were considered. I think all along I used to work for Ealing Council. RBKC do Bowder systems and Langley systems. Now, this discussion has gone on for a long, long time, and at no point was it raised by any party to consider all these other alternatives. I'm not fully aware of whether RBKC is doing green roofs anywhere. It may be that they are, but I don't know.
Okay, just to clarify there, because just outside this chamber is an example of a green roof along with our biodiversity plan as a borough, and I was just wondering, I was confused why it wasn't considered as an option. It might have been a cost option, but that's not what we're looking in front of us anyway, so I'll ask the officers. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, we'll now move on to next section of the meeting, which is questions to officers. I'll start. There was some concerns raised about a lack of detail, particularly around measurements of heights of the roof. Is there any lack of detail in this application compared to a normal application? Is there anything you're concerned about there?
In terms of the detail provided, officers came to the conclusion, based on the information provided, that there was enough detail in the application submission. They had scaled elevation drawings and along with a roof specification with the submission, so officers came to the view that the submitted information was sufficient.
Okay, so we are quite clear on the exact height of the roof that's being added?
Yes, yeah. we're confident.
Thank you. And the other question was one around safety, and I know that sits partially under, or maybe predominantly under building control, but nonetheless is still something we're concerned with. Have the relevant qualified officers reviewed it for safety, in particular fire safety?
In terms of fire safety, that would be assessed by the council's building control team. If members wanted to add an informative to the recommendation, that could be included to remind the applicant to seek a separate application under building control.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure they will do, but it doesn't hurt to add the informative, so we will do. I'm sorry, we can't go back. The way the meeting is structured, no, I'm very sorry, the way the meeting is structured, we cannot go back. There would be to ask questions or to hear from objectors or applicants. I'm sorry, the process must be followed. We cannot go back to questions from applicants or from objectors. Colleagues, any other questions? Yes, Councillor North.
It's just to ask about when the officers considered this application during a long period of time, was there any suggestion that this might be applicable for biodiversity in the fact that it could have been a green roof? Was that ever a factor in the pre-apps, maybe?
I can't confirm whether that would have been a factor or not, as I wasn't personally involved in the pre-application discussions. But the application that's been submitted today and for members to consider is a dark grey finished roof rather than a green roof.
I understand. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. It was mentioned that this application has been under discussion since 2018. So why did it take so long, and what has changed? Has anything changed significantly since 2018 to now?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't believe we've had this application since 2018, and I'm not aware of any pre-apps dating to that fact. It might be that the other parts of the council have been considering these works for a longer period of time, but for the purposes of this planning application, we have not been considering it for that long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Right, we now proceed to a vote. I think it's a number of points have been raised. Some of the points we've been discussing have been around the process of not the planning application itself, but RBKC's role as the owner and manager of the building. I think we must resist the temptation to act outside of our remit here. We've heard some competing views on how well that process was followed with housing, but that's not the remit of this committee. We do need to decide not whether the thing in front of us is the best possible thing, but whether it is acceptable. And that's a decision we must make rather than on the wider process. With that in mind, we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous, 4 in favour, so planning permission is granted. And thank you to everyone who joined us for that case. I'm going to do one more case before we take a very quick break. So we now proceed to number 5 and 7 Stratford Road.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, again, I would like to draw members' attention to the addendum report, a slight correction to the number of representations received, and also an amendment to paragraph 7.2 to include reference to a monitoring fee within the Section 106 agreement. So the application before members this evening relates to number 5 and number 7 Stanford Road. The properties can be seen identified, outlined in the red boundary on the presentation before you, and the existing front elevation, or a photograph of the existing front elevation of the buildings, can be seen. So this application has been submitted as a joint application. So the application seeks a mansard roof extension on both number 5 and number 7. Officers are recommending that a Section 106 agreement is entered into to ensure that both mansard extensions are built out at the same time. The existing and the proposed front elevation can be seen on this slide. The proposed mansard roof extension would feature 2 dormer windows on each property on the front elevation. The existing and the proposed rear elevation can be seen on this slide. The proposed rear elevation would feature a single dormer window on each of the properties. The existing and then the proposed floor plan can be seen on this slide. The extensions would comprise an additional bedroom and ensuite associated with the existing residential properties. I would draw members' attention to the proposed dormer windows on the side elevations, which would serve a hallway and landing area. So those can be seen in this location here and in this location here. This is the existing and the proposed roof plan. Again, I would draw members' attention to the location of the dormer windows and the new openings on the front, rear and side elevations. And an existing and a proposed section just to show the form of the mansard and the relationship in terms of the existing and proposed ridge height. So when considering the existing ridge height compared to the proposed mansard would be around 10 centimetres taller or higher. So this is the existing sight line. So this was provided by the applicant in the application as the long section. On the plans that were provided, the sight lines were only included for these upper floor levels. As part of this committee process, the applicant has provided it with the sight lines shown on the ground floor flats. So that's the existing, and this is the proposed. So that would consider the sight lines from the properties on Cottlesmore Gardens and Eldon Road, which is located to the north and south. Just to take you through some officer photos from number 22 Cottlesmore Gardens. So you can see on this existing photo to the left-hand image a view onto the side of number 5. Again, on the right hand is the side, and then the existing mansard extension on the side wing of the property, and then I've drawn members' attention to the existing roof form and chimney in this location here. Again, some further site photos from Cottlesmore Gardens again would draw members' attention to the existing roof form here, the height of the chimneys, and this is the location of the proposed mansards. The officer recommendation before members this evening is to grant planning permission subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement and the recommended conditions. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. And I must apologise, I was calling it Stratford Road because that's what it said in one set of notes, but it is of course Stanford Road, so apologies for that. For the objectors we have Mr. and Mrs. Isman registered. Are you with us this evening? Thank you for joining us. You have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. So we live on the second floor of 22 Cottlesmore Gardens, and the addition of this mansard roof is going to block some sunlight and some light, which goes into both our kitchen and reception room. So that's one of the objections that we have. The other objection that we have is, as the officer mentioned, there's going to be a window which is going to be added, which is going to restrict our privacy. So somebody will be now looking down on our kitchen reception room where nobody before was. The last point is, to be honest, those houses are very large already, and the number of occupants is very limited. So it begs the question why, a further extension of the mansard road is needed. So those are the points that I wanted to cover. You want to add something?
So these are our south-facing windows. So this is our main light. We live on this side. We have north-facing bedrooms, and these are actually our delight, our cherished windows. And now we're going to have sky blocked, light blocked. So we really object. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the applicants, we have Dr. Victoria Owen and Hannah Green registered. Are you with us this evening? Oh, one. Oh, wrong. Apologies. Anthony Frendo and Nicola Pease. Are you with us? Yes, fantastic. You also have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Good evening, I'm Nicola Pease, owner of number 5 Stanford Road, and I speak for the Cottons, also who own number 7. I want to make 4 points. Firstly, I used to live in this area, and I'm delighted to return to it. My brother lives in Eldon Road, and the Cottons have lived here for 50 years, and their son Charlie also lives in the immediate area. We want to do absolutely nothing to harm this area. Secondly, we would like to add family living space. We'd like to provide accommodation to my partner's son and family who need a London base. Thirdly, the large existing lofts mean that the mansards provide that extra family-friendly space whilst only raising the height of the building by 4 inches or 10 centimetres. Lastly, we'd like to thank our neighbours who responded, and in response to the objections, we are contractually committing that both buildings erect the same roof at the same time. The BRE Daylight Sunlight report demonstrates convincingly strong scores, and we are also willing to make the side windows both opaque and fixed to protect privacy. Our advisors and the Council's planning and conservation officers are all satisfied that the proposed mansard preserves the character and appearance of the properties and of the area and would ensure good living conditions for our neighbours. Thank you for your time, and I hope you support our application. I now pass over to Anthony.
Good evening, my name's Anthony Frendo and I'm a director at Maddox Planning. The proposed mansard is of a traditional design and complements the host building. The mansard retains the architectural symmetry of the pair, which form their own small group. The pair does not form or read part of a wider terrace or group. As confirmed in paragraph 1.3 of the committee report, the design of the roof extension complies with design policies CD1, CD2 and CD12. Turning to the wider area, mansards are a common feature in the conservation area, and there are a number of properties with mansards in close proximity to the site. There are also a variety of roof forms and building heights along Stanford Road, which has a mixed character. The addition of a mansard will therefore preserve and cause no harm to Stanford Road or the conservation area in accordance with policies CD3 and CD4. This is confirmed in the submitted heritage statement and by the Council's conservation officer. Both heritage experts conclude that there will be no heritage harm. With regards to living conditions at neighbouring properties, this is preserved in accordance with CD9. The submitted daylight and sunlight assessment assesses the impact of the development on the nearest properties and confirms a 100% pass rate. The development is fully BRE compliant. With regards to outlook, the nearest properties are those immediately to the north and south, which front Cottesmere Gardens and Eldon Road. The submitted long section drawing demonstrates that the mansard does not impede or adversely impact outlook from the rear-facing windows of these properties. There is also no harmful overlooking from the side windows in the mansard, as the mansard will be the dormer windows in the mansard will be obscurely glazed and fixed shut. In summary, the mansard respects and complements the pair of properties, and it will preserve the conservation area and neighbouring living conditions. It complies with the local plan, and we therefore request that planning permission is granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions? Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. Remind me, this question, actually two-part question to the applicant. Remind me again, you said you did a study for daylight?
Yeah, we did, yeah. The application is supported by a BRE daylight and sunlight assessment, and it shows it to be fully compliant.
And also, can you tell me, do you happen to know the length of your garden, the distance between your house, which is the distance between your house and number 22? Do you have an idea how long is your garden?
Yeah, so the separation distance between number 5 and the property you mentioned there is approximately 8 metres.
8 metres, thank you.
Yeah, and on the other side, so to the south, it's approximately 11 metres.
Thank you. Question to the... Sorry. Would you be satisfied now that you know that the distance is quite large and the window will be fixed and opaque, meaning there's not going to be that much of a seeing?
So, I look out of my window and I can see what part of the sky would go. Yeah, and I can see that it would be different. I can see that is going to be a disadvantage. The fact that windows would be opaque, that is a good thing, but there is a bedroom presently under the roof.
So your distress is not just the overseeing, also your view.
The light,
okay.
the light, the sky Yeah, so we are on the second floor. Also, we, in fact, well, we are also a family, so we have to manage our space.
Yeah, okay.
And we've been here for 23 years.
Yeah.
So.
And sorry, and if I may add a point, I mean, obviously I'm not, an architect, but I don't think that the distance is 8 meters. I think it's shorter than that.
It's actually the garden of number 24, Cottesmore Gardens. It's not their garden which separates us.
Thank you. Could we just bring up the sight lines on the... So just looking at this sight lines here, sorry, it's a question to Mr. and Mrs. Isman. So when I first read this case, I was assuming that the addition of a mansard level would probably, have quite a big impact on close-by neighbours. But looking at those sight lines, it seems like actually, given that the height of the chimney isn't moving and the height of the mansard on the closet wings aren't moving, that perhaps the impact isn't as big as one would first assume. So how, and I'll go to the applicants in a moment, but how substantial do you think that will be, that sort of loss of sky? Might it actually only be quite minor, given the diagram we're looking at here?
It would be easier for me to answer if you show the photograph from our windows. Yeah, so that's our kitchen window, and this must be, no, that's not from our house actually. No, that's a level below us. Do you have a photograph of our reception? No, I suppose not. So the kitchen window is just what you see on the left. So you can see this lower roof, and that is going to go up. So yes, it's going to. So there is. So this is just a close-by view on the side view, but again, it would go almost to the height of the chimney. You see. So it actually, this is taken very close to the window. So if you are back, it actually takes all of it. Yeah. So at the moment we have a roof and a tree, and we're going to have a wall.
And the point is, the chimney is already existing, but the extension is going to, basically block, each side, yes, a further portion of, the skyline and the light coming.
Okay, thank you very much. And so then to the applicants, I know you said that the BRE study said it was compliant, but do you have any figures in front of you as to how much of the sky, how much of an impact there will be on removal of sky?
Yeah, so all windows that were tested, there was either no harm or negligible. So to pass the daylight test, there has to be at least 80% of the VSC retained the existing value. In all the windows that were tested, there is 96 to 100% VSC retained. So if there was a loss of sky, the assessment wouldn't be showing such a handsome pass.
Okay, so you're saying that of all the windows tested, that the biggest loss was a 4% loss?
Correct.
Okay. And were the windows, were the Isman's windows part of the test?
Yeah, and because they're at second floor level,
well, I'll come to you in one moment. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, because they're at second floor level, there won't be a lot of sky.
Okay. Thank you. And sorry, just to go back to Mr. and Mrs. Isman, was there a further comment you wanted to make on that point?
Yes. I mean, nobody came to our apartment or to the apartment on the first floor to test, from our apartment, the impact on the daylight. So I don't know exactly how this survey was done, but nobody contacted us and nobody came to, assess in our apartment
but
what the impact would be.
We'll follow up on the process of the BRE survey with officers in the next section. Colleagues, yes, Councillor North.
I just wanted to follow up on what Councillor Idris just mentioned about the windows. We're talking about, sorry, this is to the applicant, the windows on all flanks. That's the side flanks, which are the stairwell. They will be fixed and opaque, as well as the ones at the front will be fixed and opaque.
No, just the ones at the side, because they're the ones that have the more sensitive relationship.
I'm assuming the ones at the front have the same views as the existing, or at the rear, I suppose, have the same views as the existing rear windows in the building. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Colleagues, any other questions? No. Okay, in which case we move to questions to officers. So I just want to check about this process of the BRE study. How is it done? Do people have to visit each individual window in conducting the study?
Thank you. So the BRE assessment that was submitted was carried out in accordance with kind of the best guidance. They, as part of their methodology, have set out what has been used to calculate that. That includes OS mapping, aerial imaging, and also some site photos or photographs that were taken at a certain date, and then also going on to a 3D model, and the 3D model and the data has been included as part of the daylight and sunlight report, and it has been carried out using kind of assumed values for what those rooms may be. Officers, as members may have noted in the presentation, did carry out a site visit to those properties that may be impacted to better understand what that impact may look like. And we've concluded as part of our assessment that we're satisfied that there wouldn't be a detrimental or a significant impact on those nearby properties.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Colleagues, any other questions on that? No. Okay, in which case we proceed to a vote. Yeah, I think on this one, I do think that the privacy concerns are addressed by the condition requiring the side windows to be fixed shut and opaque. In terms of, I think, sunlight, we've heard the BRE process, it is compliant based on sunlight. So the only other consideration would be sense of enclosure, which you know, one could argue there is a greater sense of enclosure by that roof being moved out. Personally, I think it's probably just about acceptable, but I think there is a decision to be made on that point. Anyway, the recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? Okay, so that's unanimous. So planning permission is granted. And thank you very much to everyone who joined us for that case. And I'm just going to take a short 5-minute break before we reconvene. Right. Thank you all. We'll reconvene the meeting now and move on to number 15 Farmer Street.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I would draw members' attention to the addendum report, a slight variation in the reason for recommended condition 3, 4 and 5 and the additional representation received. The application before members this evening relates to number 15 Farmer Street. The property can be seen identified by the red arrow on the slide before you. This is looking onto the rear elevations of the properties forming Farmer Street. The proposal seeks planning permission for rear extensions, and that's at lower ground and ground floor level. Just to go through some of the existing photographs, so on the left-hand side you can see the existing rear conservatory, which is sought to be demolished as part of this application, and to the right-hand side is showing the existing extensions built on the neighbouring property to the north. These photos were submitted from a neighbouring property taken from Jameson Street, which is located to the east and is the properties adjacent to the rear boundary. The image on the right is quite helpful. It shows the rear of the application building, just identified again by the red arrow. I would draw members' attention to the conservatory located at lower ground floor level, which is sought to be demolished as part of this application. And then also at this level here, where there's an existing amenity space, this is where an infill extension is also proposed. The existing and proposed rear elevation can be seen on these slides. As part of the application process, minor revised plans were submitted, which sought the omission from a Juliet balcony and the retention of a sash window in this location here, which has just been identified in this red kind of bubble marking. The proposal seeks the construction of a full-width lower ground floor rear extension, which can be seen here, and then an infill extension at ground floor level in this location here. Just to go through the floor plans, so this is the proposed lower ground floor plan. You can see that the proposed extension would project 0.6 metres from the existing closet wing. The proposed ground floor extension, and this is where the proposed infill extension is located in this area here. This is the proposed first floor plan, and again, members may note the omission of the Juliet balcony and the retention of the existing sash window. This is the proposed section, so you've got the existing closet wing in this location here, and then this is the proposed infill extension at ground floor level, and then the additional projection at lower ground floor level here. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions set out within the officer's report, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Now I'll be joined by Tanya Arfield for the objectors. Thank you for joining us. You have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Just before I started, I just wanted to make sure that committee members had before them photographs that I had sent in recently, which I was assured would be in your packs because they might be helpful to explain or to illustrate some of the points I'm making.
We do have a number of photographs in our pack, whether I assume they're the ones you sent in. These ones here. And these ones here. I don't know if you can see those. I assume they're probably the ones you sent in, are they?
Yeah, so
we've
got a late, as part of the addendum, there's been a late representation received, which also includes a photograph of the rear elevation, and then the original photos that were submitted as part of the objection comments were included or are included as part of the main pack, and they're a bit more of a bigger image compared to what's included here.
So, okay. Sorry, but the photographs I sent in recently, with 3 photographs, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we have those.
Lovely.
Fantastic. So, yeah, 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
This application is strongly opposed by neighbouring residents. I live in Jameson Street directly behind the application site. Context is all important here. The terraces in Hillgate Village consist of small-scale houses built very close together. The average house on Farmer Street and the east side of Jameson Street has a footprint of under 50 square metres. The 2 terraces are separated by a narrow strip of small patio gardens, allowing for some greenery within the built-up space. The distance between the back of the applicant's house and mine, for example, is only 7 metres. The planning officer argues the extensions are modest, but modest is relative when there is so little space to play with. Any further projection into such a limited space will not only erode the green area, but crucially will also increase the sense of enclosure. This is in breach of policy CD9. As paragraph 6.83 recognises, an overbearing or over-dominant sense of enclosure can significantly reduce the quality of living conditions both inside and outside, and this is exactly what we all feel. Our privacy, and mine in particular, will also be impacted. Paragraph 6.81 of the same policy states that a distance of about 18 metres between opposite habitable rooms reduces intervisibility to an acceptable degree. There are only 7 metres between us currently. Anything less will be a significant infringement of my privacy. It's unrealistic to suggest that overlooking will not worsen. The current terrace on the ground floor level is only used in good weather, so overlooking is for limited periods of time. The infill extension with its French doors and Juliet balcony will be used all year round, directly overlooking my garden and glazed living area. In terms of appearance, the extensions will create a bulkier and more dominant building. Infill extensions in the immediate area are currently only at lower ground level and do not project beyond the rear closet wings, and you can see that in the photos I've sent. Under policy CD13, extensions, as you know, must be subordinate to the existing building. The applicant claims to comply by setting back the ground floor infill, but by only 30 centimetres, the size of a ruler. This isn't sufficient. It will appear as a monolithic structure out of keeping with the rest of the terrace. And where will this stop? 15 Farmer Street already has a full-height 3-storey rear closet wing and an infill extension at lower ground floor, including a conservatory that projects beyond the rear elevation line. The applicant is now wanting to add a full-width lower ground floor extension, a ground floor infill extension, and in a separate application, a roof extension now under appeal. The applicant is looking to maximise the property in every way possible. If every house on Farmer Street and Jameson Street did this, the character and appearance of the terraces and conservation area would be devastated, and living conditions for neighbouring properties would be untenable. I ask the Council to put a stop to this, as it is entitled to do under the policies of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll be joined by Hannah Green and Victoria Owen.
Hi.
Hi there. We went slightly over in the last one, so you have up to 3.5 minutes whenever you're ready.
I'm the agent and architect for this application. Concerns have been raised in regards to the impact on neighbouring amenity and the character of the conservation area, so I'd like to address those points specifically. In terms of the character of the conservation area, proposed rear extensions cannot be seen from any street, so there is no impact on the heavily protected streetscapes of Hillgate Village and the conservation area. The extensions can only be seen from the rear of close neighbouring properties and would sit surrounded by other predominantly larger extensions. Some of the surrounding properties here have extended the full length of their rear gardens. Some have extended on multiple stories. They've installed roof terraces, Juliet balconies, lean-tos, and used materiality from traditional brickwork and render to more contemporary steel frame and structural glazing. This complex vernacular is typical for rear properties in the area, and we would be contributing to this in a very subtle way in comparison to the other extensions. The proposed extensions also remain sympathetic to the original building through setting back the ground floor infill extension to show subordinates and through use of traditional materiality instead of the contemporary materiality you can see. In terms of impact on neighbouring amenity, the proposed lower ground floor extension sits behind a 3-metre solid brick wall which lies between the rear boundary of our site, 15 Farmer Street, and the rear of 16 Jameson Street, ensuring there is no impact on amenity for this neighbour here. Due to the minimal length of the extension being just 630 mil, the impact on adjacent neighbouring amenity would be negligible. The proposed ground floor infill extension sits in the location of an existing roof terrace. The inhabitants of 15 Farmer Street are therefore already able to stand, sit, relax where this new extension is proposed, and already have a full view of the rear of the properties on Jameson Street from this position. Installation of an extension here would merely enclose an already accessible space and not change the existing outlook at all. Just a final thought, we have taken on board neighbouring comments and comments from the case officer during the planning process. Since our previous application, we've removed a story, and during the determination of this application, we have removed the French doors and Juliet balcony, as the case officer mentioned. We have not, however, made alterations to the lower ground floor and ground floor extensions, as we strongly believe that they have no impact on neighbouring amenity nor the character of the conservation area. I'd just like to also just respond to a specific comment made by the applicant where she says that the distance between the two neighbours is 7 metres, and that would remain unchanged, and that is from the rear of the closet wing to the rear of the closet wing. From the rear of the main house to the rear of the main house is 13 metres. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, who would like to ask the first question? Councillor Dent-Code.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to ask Mrs. Arfili about the sense of enclosure and the nature of, as we know, Hillgate Village is absolutely packed in, isn't it? You're living on top of each other. So tell me, we're hearing about the modesty of this extension and so on, but about the impact which will be on your home. But also about other extensions. Is this exceptional in your terms? Because I don't really know what happens. The back of the buildings, obviously the fronts are heavily conserved, but the back of the buildings, what's happening? Is this unusual? Is it a step too far? Is this crossing a line?
Well, I feel it is. There are various forms of extensions. It's right that there are a variety of extensions, but not everyone has anything like this sort of extent. I, for example, have an infill on the lower ground only. It's within the closet wall. There are no extensions above, no extensions higher than ground level on my property, and I don't have a roof terrace on any level. So certainly on my side and also the two sides, either side of the applicant, everything that there is very neatly placed within their closet wing extensions, and there isn't any protrusion. The applicant suggested that there would be no change in that the space wouldn't change, but of course if you're building a living area over what was a terrace, then you are bringing that area 2.6, I think it is, metres nearer to me, and that looks directly down on my living space, which is glazed. It happens.
So currently there's a Juliet balcony which is used periodically, and your concern is particularly at that level that it would be used regularly and there would be permanent overseeing of your home.
And that is because it is going to be a living space, so there will be much more permanent overlooking. And I should just say, just to give you a feel, that in the summertime when everyone has their windows open and people are in their gardens, I mean, I can hear people on the telephone in the neighbouring, in the applicants. I can hear everything, and we accept that because we live in the area, but we are all very respectful of each other's space, and we all want to be able to enjoy our very small patio gardens, and they are very small. And so that is a real concern. If something is going, if a building is getting more and more bulky, that sense of enclosure will be very worrying.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just follow up on that. on that question. In terms of the impact on living conditions, sense of enclosure, would you say is it the building line being moved out that's the more significant factor, or is it the infill at upper ground floor level, or is it really a fairly even combination of the two?
Well, from my point of view, my personal point of view, obviously the ground floor is of greatest concern for me. The building line coming.
The lower ground floor or the upper ground floor?
No, the ground floor, not the lower ground. The
raised ground floor. Yeah.
The raised ground floor.
Yeah.
Yes, that is obviously of more concern. However, I would say that the fact that this will be a full width lower ground floor extension, that is eroding part of the applicant's garden and therefore bringing them much closer to me and also to the neighbours on either side of them.
Thank you. Colleagues, the questions. Councillor North.
Thank you. I am very familiar with Farmer Street and Jameson Street, and I've seen a number of the properties there. Some of them have got no garden at all now. It's been completely built over, so I have some sympathy on how you manage that there, and I have to say my heart goes out to everybody, including the current applicant that lives there, to make the best use of that space that they've got before, maybe in my lifetime, it disappears altogether. That being said, Councillor Bennett's just actually asked the question I was going to ask you. Is there anything from this scheme, by means of condition, that could go further that would help your objections?
I mean, if there weren't windows that overlooked me, but I mean, that's not what's in front of you. And I think, I mean, it's difficult to ask me that because I'm not an expert on knowing what sort of conditions I might ask for, and no one's asked me that question, so I haven't looked into it. I mean, I just feel that this is very much the thin end of a wedge, and that also that the houses on Jameson Street haven't been looked at because I understand an officer did attend the applicant's site, but I asked for someone to come over to my side to see what it looks like and feels like from Jameson Street, and that hasn't happened. And in fact, I was a little concerned to see that the officers say that they visited on the 7th of July. I happened to look that up and it was a Sunday, so I did wonder whether there had actually been a visit at all, because I think in terms of enclosure and privacy, those are things that need to be assessed by looking at the site itself.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a note of that to ask the officers, actually. Officers visit site on the 7th of July 2024. I will ask that question for you. I will just ask the applicant just one final question. This property has been subject to applications in the past, one that didn't go through. There's currently another live application, I believe, concerning the roof. Do you consider that this property has already been considerably changed from its original format to the back and takes up quite a lot of the rear space already?
In comparison to a lot of the neighbouring properties, it hasn't experienced as much alteration, as much extension. The most recent extension was the very small conservatory, and then before that it was a very small extension of the closet wing. Like I said in my speech, a lot of the places have just completely engulfed their garden, and we in no way want to do that. Our extension is very, very small. It's only 630 mil, and half of that has already been taken up by the conservatory.
Any further questions? No. Okay, in which case we proceed to questions to officers. Councillor North, I think you had one. Go ahead.
Could I just ask about that visit the officers made on the 7th of July? If you can confirm the details?
Of course. Unfortunately, it wasn't myself that carried out the site visit. I wasn't the case officer for this application. I have just had a look to see if I can see any correspondence on the file, and unfortunately there isn't anything on there. I would imagine that it's a slight typo in the officer's report that we would have carried out a site visit, but the date has been entered incorrectly. But I'm afraid I can't confirm which date the officer carried out the site visit.
And is there any record of the objectors' request that officers visit their place being responded to or acknowledged?
Unfortunately, again, I don't have that information before me this evening or on the case file from an initial look.
And the only other question I've got, there is another live application for this property, is that correct? Thank you.
So, so as set out in section 4 of the officer's report, there is an application for an application at roof level, I believe, which was refused and is currently being appealed. But I don't believe that appeal we haven't yet had the decision, for that appeal.
Okay, but there is another live application, which I'm just wondering why it would be separate from this application, considering the roof?
I believe as they're separate, so the application for the roof is for a roof terrace, whereas these applications for the rear addition, so they don't need to be carried out together.
They don't need to be carried out together, but I would raise the question why they were separated out. We don't normally have a property that puts two applications in at the same time, one for the roof and one for the closet wing, unless there was a want to say that we're just doing a little extension here and a little extension there.
So each application would be considered with its own merits. There are various reasons why the applicant may have submitted two applications for two different things. The roof level application has been refused, and that is currently being challenged through the appeal process. But yeah, unfortunately, we need to consider the application that's been submitted, and whether it may have been included as part of one application or as part of two. We need to consider them separately.
I just had a question on the other extensions that have been done on that road. So, I mean, the applicant makes a reasonable point that there are extensions that have gone beyond what's being applied for here, though I imagine they were probably done, some of them some time ago, and quite possibly under different local plans. What weight should we give those as precedents in this case?
Thank you, Councillor. So you're correct. There has been rear alterations and rear additions to the rear of the properties along Farmer Street over time. Some of those were consented under different policies and different development plan policies. What the policies of the local plan seek to do is to ensure that any extensions or any modifications to buildings are subordinate, are subservient, and continue to preserve the character and appearance of the building. So you do need to, and you can give weight to the built development along Farmer Street, especially when you're considering kind of that rear building line, which I know has been mentioned today as well. You can see that at lower ground floor level, there have been extensions which have completely infilled the rear garden. So you do need to give weight and consider kind of the surrounding townscape and how it will read as part of the grouping of Farmer Street. But I appreciate that some of them have been granted a long time ago.
Thank you. And just one other question. In terms of, so we've talked quite a bit about living conditions. In terms of the character and appearance of the building and the conservation area, this can't be seen from any public views from the street. So again, what sort of relative weight do you give, or should we be giving to private views from the rear of properties versus from the street?
So as identified, the property is located within a conservation area. The policies within the local plan do consider both private and public viewpoints, so members do need to give weight to those views within rear gardens as well. So not only the views from the street scene, but also views from private viewpoints within the conservation area. So that would include views from the neighbouring properties along Farmer Street and along Jameson Street. Officers, I would just summarise that officers have considered those private viewpoints as part of the assessment and are satisfied that the proposal as a whole would preserve.
Thank you. And I know I said last question, but I have one more. And to what extent can we consider thinking more about both conservation area and living conditions, the cumulative impact of extensions, because there's already been a number, how you perceive an area. It's not just, you're looking out the rear of the property, it's a number of buildings. Is the cumulative impact of number of extensions relevant?
So I think when considering the cumulative impact, members could consider the impact to the host building, so to number 15 itself. So you would need to consider the impact of an extension at lower ground and at ground floor level, and that cumulative impact. Because if it was granted, they could both be built out, both extensions, so you do need to consider the impact of both of them.
Any other questions? It's difficult this one because there have been so many extensions there already, and so it is a fair point that this isn't as bad as some of the others. But then on the other hand, you know, as you said, I think Councillor North, if we keep going this way, they could build out all the remaining green space left there, and this does go beyond the building line of at least the original building line and the neighbour to one of the sides, but not the other, and filling in that sort of upper ground closet line again is more, you know, it does have a cumulative impact and does infringe upon that open space. So I think it's a fairly finely balanced case. Excuse me. Right, I'll do a show of hands. The recommendation is to grant, isn't it, in this one? Yes. So the recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? Okay, so that's unanimous against. The planning permission is not granted. We now need to propose a reason. So I'm going to suggest that we, to my mind and based on the conversation, I think both impact on conservation area and impact on living conditions is relevant, and that is both due to the moving out of the building line as well as the partial infill of the closet wing and overlooking, Councillor Denkode mentions there as well. So is that fine to have list all those reasons?
I was just going to clarify on from your discussions in terms of the impact on living conditions, is that through the new openings proposed on the rear at the ground and lower ground floor level in relation to Jameson Street, or what is it in relation to appearing?
So the impact on living conditions is I think the sense of enclosure at the rear of the properties there, both by the extension of the building line and by the infill, as well as sort of an increased level of overlooking as well. Yep. Okay, so I'm happy to propose that as a reason. Can I have a seconder? So Councillor Denkode to second that. So can I see all those in favour of that reason? And that's, unanimous in favour of those reasons. Right, well, thank you very much to everyone who joined us for that case. We now proceed to number 23, Milner Street.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to draw members' attention to the committee addendum report, which includes further representations received by residents, along with an update to the officer's report. And as a verbal update to the committee, there's only one additional representation received rather than two. This is an application for planning permission for the installation of an air conditioning unit with an enclosure at the roof level of the building. The site comprises a 4-storey with a lower ground floor level terrace building on Milner Street. Within the terrace group, the roofscape is consistent and features flat mansard roofs with each property separated by chimney stacks. The site is located in the Chelsea Conservation Area and is adjacent to the Grade 2 listed terrace, which is situated along Ovington Square. This slide shows the photographs of the site along with the rear elevation. This slide shows the existing front and rear elevations. And this slide shows the proposed front and rear elevation, showing the AC unit located at the roof level. This slide shows the existing and proposed roof plans, which show the position of the unit, which is placed in the centre of the roof against the chimney stacks. And this slide shows the existing and proposed section of the air conditioning unit, which would be sited within an acoustic enclosure. and further details of the enclosure have been requested, including the materials by condition. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have Stephen Baxter registered to speak in objection. Mr. Baxter, are you with us? Thank you for joining us. You have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Chairman, before I start, can I just check that you all have in your packs the photograph, the single photograph that we included with our objection letter? Yes, you've got it down.
Yes, we do.
I'm speaking both for myself and for my neighbours and for the Milner Street Area Residents Association who've asked me to speak for them. I have 3 points to make. The first is that the large enclosure on the roof directly opposite us will be highly visible and on the skyline. You've got the picture already. It will be 1 metre higher than the roof level and span about 1/3 of the width of the building, so it would not be discreetly located as suggested in the officer's report. In fact, it would be the only break in the established roof line of this terrace group. Why is the officer's report not accepting this point? The report suggests that this breach of conservation area guidelines does not matter because the construction would not be widely visible. However, neighbours opposite who live in the conservation area would be very directly affected. Another recent application to install air conditioning at the back of 25 Hasker Street was refused because it was visible to neighbours, even though it was not visible from the street. The second point is that the unit would disturb us and other neighbours, and the submitted noise impact assessment is wrong. The purpose of a noise report should be to reassure the council that noise from the unit will not disturb neighbours. It should estimate the sound level as from the nearest neighbouring window to ensure it is within the council's limit. This is under the council's SPD on noise. Unfortunately, there is a major deficiency in the way this has been done for the nearest window at 25 Milner Street. We have explained this carefully in our objection letter and submitted a corrected calculation. Our estimated noise level at 25 Milner Street would in fact be about twice the council's limit. We've also included a noise calculation for windows directly facing the unit, which was not done by the applicant, and this would exceed the council's limit as well, so neighbours across the street would also be disturbed. We have still not had a satisfactory response to any of this. Neither the Environmental Health Officer nor the Planning Officer even tries to answer these points. Although a switch-off clause has been recommended as a standard condition, the noise report is required to reassure the committee that the noise will be within acceptable levels and not require subsequent enforcement. In this case, the figures show the exact opposite. It is vital that the noise impact assessments accompanying planning applications are properly scrutinised and any objections clearly and publicly assessed. These reports are essential to effective planning control. Objections and inaccuracies should not just be ignored, and applications with sufficient reports should be refused. Otherwise, the whole process is meaningless. Third, a very simple point. The application already has planning permission to locate the air conditioning unit under the rear garden, and there were no objections to this. The applicant should use the existing planning permission. For all these reasons, the new application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have anyone registered to speak for the applicant, so we proceed to questions. Colleagues who would like to ask a question? No. Excuse me. I had a question on the aesthetic point of view. So I appreciate the roof line is important, and though it's not visible from the street, it is visible from neighbours' windows. People do sometimes put things on their roof. And I appreciate this is slightly larger than usual, but if the proper material, if we condition the proper materials we used, so it blended in with the look of the roofs, do you think that would overcome some of the issue, or do you think it would still be a major issue for you?
No, it wouldn't overcome the issue. As you can see from the photograph, it's taking up it's on the skyline. In fact, in the photograph submitted, it is quite a lot larger than the dome of the Brompton Oratory that you can see beyond.
Okay, and then on the acoustic qualities of it, an additional condition we sometimes add is that it has to be checked on installation. So it will actually, at the point where it's turned on, a sound check will be done to see if it meets the environmental health regulations, and if it doesn't, it has to be turned off immediately, i.e. it will never be put into operation until it can meet those tests. I'll ask officers in the next section about some of the issues you've raised with the sound report, but again, would that address your concerns on sound grounds?
No, it wouldn't, because my questions just haven't been answered. We've raised some very good points, important points on the sound report, saying why it's wrong. I actually took the trouble to call the planning officer shortly after the application appeared to say I had points on the noise report, and he asked me to put them in writing, which I did. I then said that if anybody didn't understand it, I'd be happy to engage directly with the environmental health officer if he wished to discuss the points that I had made. Nobody contacted me.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, other questions? No. Oh, yes? Councillor Dentcode.
Mr. Baxter, thank you. I'm quite confused as to why, and of the reasons you may not know, as to why an application to bury this in the garden was then reconsidered and then put it on the roof. Do you have any idea of what that was? Because surely it makes more sense to put it in the garden and it's less hassle, isn't it? Surely. Do you have any idea why that might have been?
I don't know, because nobody objected to that, and it would obviously make more sense. When I had a conversation with the planning officer, he suggested that there was some party wall issue. But in my experience, which is fairly considerable, I don't think party wall issues stop anything in the long term. You just have to do a bit more work to satisfy the party wall requirements. It's not a party wall issue whether you put that sort of thing in the garden. So I have no idea why the applicant suddenly decided to change from putting the unit in an acceptable place to an unacceptable place. And I've seen other planning applications that have basically pointed out in the officer's report that the applicant has not chosen the most acceptable place for an air conditioning unit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Move to next section. Right, we now move to questions to officers. Colleagues who would like to ask a question of officers. Councillor Idris.
My question is, have anybody visited the site and visited the building?
Yes, it's my understanding that the case officer did visit the site as part of a previously withdrawn application. Okay. So there was a previous application which was withdrawn, and the case officer did attend the site.
Because if you visit Milner Street, you would not want anything like this on top of a building. It's a beautiful open street, unfurnished, and the whole area is more or less equally the same. This is an eyesore and it will stand out. I don't care what kind of chimney you put it behind. It's much wider than a chimney. So I'm surprised the person who visited that street did not see and appreciate that something like this will be an eyesore.
So just to sort of turn that into a question, how the roof line from private views, in this case from Milner Street, how important is that in terms of preserving the conservation area, and why do we not consider that this affects that roof line?
Yes, so private views are a consideration if members see that this air conditioning unit would cause harm to those private views. It's likely that the unit would only really be visible from the upper levels of the buildings opposite, but members can take that into consideration.
And then also had a question, so 25 Hasker Street was raised. Do you have any information about that, about why that was refused?
I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to confirm on the Hasker Street application.
Okay, not to worry then. Colleagues, yes, Councillor North.
Well, the good news is the officers visited on a Monday on this site. I can see it from the form. The other thing is the installation of the air conditioning condenser unit that was granted on the lower level of this property. That's obviously, well, it's not obviously. I'm presuming that's not instead of. That's for the lower floors, and this will be for the upper floors. Is that correct, as an assumption?
I think we probably don't know.
Okay.
We have to sort of. We can't really guess as to whether they're using the other one as well or why they're not. You know, there might be good reasons or there might not be, but we can't really guess at that. So we've just got to consider this application by itself. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, nothing extra to add on that.
Any other questions? So I have one more. Do we have any? I mean, we've heard that Milner Street has a very consistent roof line. Do we have any more information on that? Anything which does break up the roof line currently?
As far as I'm aware, there's nothing else which breaks up the roof line, but officers took the view that because of the setback of the air conditioning unit, that would be sufficient in this situation.
Okay, thank you. Should we move to a decision? Well, I think it's relevant just to say, because I did double check, the dimensions of the unit is 1 metre tall, so it's not, you know, it's sort of a bit less than half a storey, which is not nothing, but you know, it's 1 metre, 1.3 metres wide and 1.6 metres deep. So I think it is relevant that it can't be seen from the street, but we do also need to bear in mind that roof lines from private views are also relevant and are a positive contributor to the conservation area. In which case we proceed to a vote. So recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? Okay, so planning permission is not granted. So we need to propose a reason for turning down planning permission, and I think the main reason is around aesthetics and the conservation area. I would probably advise against the acoustic point because I think the conditions could sort that out with an environmental health check as and when it's installed. So I would advise we just do it based on conservation area. So it would have effectively have a negative impact on the conservation area because it would break up the roof line. Okay. So I'm happy to propose that. Can I see a seconder? Councillor Idris to the second. So it's in your ward. All those in favour? So that's unanimous in favour of that reason to reject planning permission. Right. Thank you, Mr. Baxter, for joining us for that case. We now move on to York House at 1 Tux Road.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to briefly present this one to you. As you highlighted at the starter committee, there's a few applications on this agenda that have been caught in the adoption of our new local plan, and this is one of them. So members will remember that this application came before them on the 17th of April this year, where members resolved to grant planning permission subject to the completion of a legal agreement. Unfortunately, that legal agreement was not completed and sealed prior to the adoption of our new local plan, and due to the change in policies which weren't reflected in the original report, I need to bring this back to you with this short addendum report in your packs to have your agreement, well, to basically recommend the application again. So I've put together a couple of brief slides just to remind you of the site, but you have already resolved on the application and nothing has changed since that date. So this is York House. It's for alterations to a previously approved scheme to provide a residential dwelling within the kind of light well area of the building. So here are the 2018, the 2023 application and the current application, which are just the minor alterations to the application. And again, the ground floor plans, which just showing the minor alterations for your convenience. And then the roof plans here of the amendments, which show the kind of amendment, which was the additional floor. So yeah, that concludes my presentation, and it really is just for the addendum report to be considered and for a recommendation to be, for granting planning permission to be considered again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we're joined by Glyn Evans this evening. Ms. Evans, you have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the third time this development has been before the committee on this since 2018, and I want to make 3 points. After 6 years, the leaseholders and residents of York House just want the developers to get on with the job without further levels and accretions. Second, our concern remains that the development could impact adversely on an already compromised building, and I could not disagree more with the planners that the latest additions are minor. Excavating under York House, which was not the case before, is not a minor addition. But thirdly, because of the compromised nature of the building, I want to ask for a further condition. Now, we know perfectly well that structural issues are not for building control, not for planners or this committee, and that is precisely the problem. The Grenfell Tower report has underlined the systemic weaknesses and failures of building control and current regulation, whether private or by the council. In the words of the Health and Safety Executive, constructing a basement underneath a domestic property is specialized high-risk work that can catastrophically affect the stability of existing buildings. York House, this proposed build is a particularly onerous and risky build on a sensitive building with a unique set of non-standard circumstances. And our concern has been whether building control can provide adequate oversight. York House has RSD, Regent Street disease, and hence post-enfranchisement in 2019 we installed a multi-million-pound impressed cathodic protection system to stabilize the steel core and prevent further corrosion. The Grenfell Tower report questions the ability of existing building control and regulatory systems adequately to address the problems of high-risk buildings. If I might quote, the evidence shows that in the period leading up to the Grenfell Tower fire, many of those involved in major construction projects, including clients, contractors, and even architects, regarded building control primarily as a source of advice and assistance. It was even described as an extension of the design time. That was a serious misunderstanding, but it was fostered by building control bodies themselves who preferred to cooperate with the client to enable projects to be approved rather than to enforce the building regulations. And it also adds, we think that one way to eliminate shortcomings of the kind we have identified and to improve the efficiency of contractors would be to introduce a licensing system for those wishing to undertake work on higher risk buildings. That would ensure that those working on the most sensitive buildings are qualified by experience. We realize we can't seek a delay until the government implements the more big recommendations and establishes a centralized regulator. But I would like to ask for a further condition to be imposed, which would be to require the utmost transparency on the part of the applicant's structural engineer and building control company, and a mechanism to oblige them to liaise closely and regularly with the structural engineer appointed on behalf of York House and any other experts, such as the one engineers overseeing the ICCP system. Such a condition would also give us some continuity and security should the lease change hands again. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would just add that we do attach the utmost importance to detailed application of Condition 10 as regards the use of hand tools, since this can limit the amount of vibration, which again might impact on the stability of the building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, we don't have anyone speaking for the applicant, so we go to questions. Colleagues, Councillor Denkcode.
you. Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Evans, can I ask you a little bit more about, you say the building is compromised. What you said, you spoke briefly about the what was it, the rust in the frame, or what was it? Can you just explain a little bit about that? Because obviously that's a concern.
Regent Street disease means that York House has a steel core and brickwork, and the outside is, and the main frame is brickwork. With Regent Street disease, when the steel is affected by damp, by water ingress, and it expands, and in doing so it cracks the brickwork and causes considerable damage. The impressed cathodic protection system is an electronic system that is wrapped around the building at 1 meter intervals, and it stabilizes the corrosion. It stabilizes corrosion at the point it has reached and prevents any further corrosion from happening. It's a well-established practice and has been used, I think, originally, as the name would suggest, in Regent Street.
Okay, thank you. Can I just follow that up? Thank you. Which is your requests, obviously, for effective building control and proper liaison with the structural engineers, but also hand tools to be used. And obviously, the report says that would take longer. Is that an issue for you, or would you rather it took longer and they used hand tools if it was possible to impose that? What's your feeling on that?
We already have Condition 10 imposed from the first agreement back in 2018, and we just attached, there have been attempts to remove it. We recognize it will take longer, but given the problems of the building, we would prefer to be safe rather than speedy, if I can put it that way.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just had one question on your recommended condition, just so I understand it right, because we've got to make sure that any condition we oppose is reasonable and enforceable. So who are you saying this structural engineer would be appointed by? Who would he be representing? The residents of York House?
The applicants have a structural engineer and have already said that they would like to stay in touch with our structural engineer. We just wish to reinforce that. York House has its own structural engineer that has done all the work, assessing the damage hitherto and overseeing the ICC, the Impressed Cathodic Protection System. All we want is for there to be a mechanism for regular and open consultation between our engineers and the applicant's engineers, and further their building control company. If I might just go back, the previous owners of the lease would not communicate with York House residents and freeholders at all. When I found out who their building control company was and tried to brief them on the issues, they were not allowed to speak to me. So it depends very much, as I understand it, building control depends very much on the information provided by the client. The owners of the building or owners of the freehold have absolutely no say and no contribution unless it is required. I think in this case I have no doubt that the applicants will wish to liaise and communicate, as they have said they would do so, including before this committee. But we would like to see a condition requiring regular consultation and open transparency, just in case circumstances should change and they would move and the lease be sold to someone else who might not wish to follow in those footsteps.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Colleagues, any other questions before we proceed to the next section? No. In which case we proceed to questions to officers. So I'll start on that point of the recommended condition. Could you give us some advice on how that might be worded and whether that could be considered reasonable?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so I draw members' attention to condition 4, which does stipulate that no development should commence until a chartered civil engineer or chartered structural engineer has been appointed, and that those contact details should be confirmed in writing to the local planning authority. So I'm not sure if that is sufficient to cover the concerns that have been raised.
I think what Ms. Evans was saying was the applicant will have their own engineer, but the residents will have already or will appoint their own structural engineer. And so what they're really looking for is open dialogue and consultation between the two. I mean, perhaps it's more about the consultation and open dialogue than it is about the structural engineer, because residents are obviously would be able to refer that information to an engineer or to whichever expert they wish. So I think it's more about the regular consultation and sort of establishing that as a requirement.
Thank you, Chairman. It might be difficult to construct a reasonable condition to compel the applicants to engage with a third party outside of the kind of scope of the development scheme. I imagine some of that might be covered under civil matters. We could add an informative to state that that would be kind of good practice and they should seek to engage with the structural engineer of the building. However, it may be difficult for us to construct a reasonable and enforceable condition to cover those grounds. So
if we never put on a condition before setting out some sort of mechanism for ongoing consultation with residents as the process proceeds? No?
Thank you. I can't think of a recent example where I've added a condition to that effect, just because you're obligating someone outside of the applicant's control to them.
Well, it would be, I suppose it would be the applicant or the applicant's engineer, whoever they've appointed, just sharing information with the residents and consulting with the residents on a regular basis.
It could be that we maybe expand condition 4 to have a point C that maybe reads then this information should be provided to and consulted upon with the residents, but with no obligation for there to be, how do I put it, like a binding agreement for them to be able to discharge the condition.
Yeah, I think if we add a point C there which says this information to be provided in a timely fashion, or you can do the precise wording, but words to that effect, to residents on a regular basis, then that I think achieves most of what we're looking for. Yeah. Okay. All right. Happy with that. Any other questions before we proceed to a vote? No. Okay. In which case, with that addition of point C to condition number 4. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So planning permission is granted unanimously. And thank you, Ms Evans, for joining us for that case. We now proceed to Flat 1 and Flat A, 76 Cathcart Road.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to draw members' attention to the addendum report, which includes that 1 additional representation instead of 3 have been received. This is an application for planning permission for the amalgamation of 2 residential 1-bed flats to create a single 2-bed flat. The proposals do not include any external alterations. This application is recommended for refusal as the proposals would result in the loss of a residential unit. The site is a mid-terrace building over 5 stories, including the lower ground floor, and is located on the northern side of the street. The proposal relates to Flat A, which is located at the lower ground floor level, and Flat 1 at the upper ground floor level. Both existing flats are 1-bedroom units. This slide shows an aerial view of the site. This slide shows the existing floor plans. Flat A is situated at the lower ground floor level and measures at approximately 56.6 metres squared, and Flat 1 is sited at the ground floor level and measures approximately 49 metres squared. This slide shows the proposed amalgamation, which would result in a 2-bedroom flat and would measure approximately 105.6 square metres. This application is recommended for refusal for the reasons set out in the officer's report. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're joined by George Ducker for the applicant. Mr. Ducker, you have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is George Ducker and I'm the planning agent working on this application on behalf of the appellant. The proposal aims to sensibly and thoughtfully convert the existing 2 vacant 1-bedroom residential flats at ground and lower ground floor to create 1 2-bedroom residential flat. The development is required to better optimise the layout and living environment for future occupiers. The chief considerations in the determination of the application are housing quality, housing need and design and heritage. So in terms of housing quality, development will greatly improve upon the housing quality of the existing site for future occupiers, overcoming numerous issues with the current flats. So one of these issues is space standards. So the current ground floor, being 49 square metres, is under the minimum space standards expected of a 1-bed, 2-person apartment, with the size of the bedroom in this flat also falling below the minimum space standards for a double bed. The amalgamation would also allow for all minimum space standards to be met. The amalgamation would allow for all minimum space standards to be met and exceeded for a 2-bedroom, 4-person dwelling by providing a flat of 105.6 square metres. The size of the proposed apartment would also allow it to be made into a 3-bed, 6-person apartment, however, to allow for a larger family dwelling, whilst also being above space standards if any future occupier would prefer such a mix. So it gives that flexibility in terms of a 2 or 3-bed in terms of space standards. In terms of sunlight, daylight and internal layout, the existing lower ground floor flat suffers from a lack of adequate natural light, and this flat also currently has a poor internal layout, with the kitchen positioned within the corridor to the bathroom with no natural light, and the only access to the garden being through the bathroom, and significantly the only toilet being outside. Moving on to housing need, the amalgamation would allow for the creation of much needed family housing, as recognised by policy HO4 of the recently adopted local plan. 60% of the need for market housing in the borough is for 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, and the proposed amalgamation would support a 2 and 3 bedroom home with its own private garden, thereby positively responding to the identified housing need. Although it is recognised that the recently adopted local plan policy HO1 is more restrictive to amalgamations than its preceding policy and now superseded local plan, amalgamations are not precluded in the borough if certain criteria in bringing homes up to a standard are met. And this is shown by 2 recent approvals for the amalgamation of residential dwellings, which have occurred after the new local plan has been adopted. On design and heritage, development would require no external alterations, protecting the appearance of the property within the conservation area and having no impact on the living conditions of neighbouring residents. The site would also historically have been 1 single large dwelling house, and therefore the amalgamation is of heritage benefit by partially reconnecting the site to its former layout. So in terms of, in summary, the existing homes are substandard, and the proposal has the benefit of delivering a high quality family size home meeting identified need with an improved internal layout, while there being no loss in residential floor space. Development therefore accords with the development plan when read as a whole, and therefore it should be approved. Please, David, let me know if you have any questions in respect to the application.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions on that? Yes, Councillor Rogers.
Is the proposed amalgamation, will that become a family home or is it an investment?
It's the aspiration to be a family home. That's the aspirations of the appellant. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a question. Presumably it's the lower ground floor flat that has access to the garden, so the upper ground floor flat doesn't currently have any outside space? Is that correct?
They do actually, but they have both currently have access. They do both have outside space. So the lower ground floor flat has it has a small kind of terrace area, garden bit, access through the bathroom presently, and the upper the ground floor flat has a kind of steps going down from so it does, and then it's sort of out behind the back of the lower ground floor to back to garden basically. So
okay, yeah. Understood. And could you just tell us a little bit more about the lower ground floor flat in terms of the amount of light and living conditions currently in the lower ground floor?
Yeah, so obviously it's under the kind of the main the line of the street basically. So it's set down basically. So naturally its light is limited because it's only going to come up certain times of the day basically. Because obviously originally it was developed as a large house, and obviously it's been subdivided. And I think because of that, the light's limited, and also because the layout is such that certain rooms don't have access to basically any natural light, such as the kitchen, bathroom area, and the main living areas in terms of the bedroom and the main living area, or they get some natural light. It's very limited by the fact that it's the light is not, you know, it's set back, it's set down from the street level, and I think if you brought a proposal like forward today with an application for a dwelling which was below the roof, below the road level, and with like basically a large wall, you know, it would probably not be acceptable. I would ascertain.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Any further questions? No, we'll proceed to questions to officers. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Idris.
Yes, sorry. Thanks, Chair. I know we are very much against amalgamation, but sometimes common sense will make something that looks decent, and maybe you can make allowances. Have we considered that, or is that something not within the guidelines?
So as part of the assessment of the application, the starting point for all amalgamations is our policy prevents them, and we refuse them. There is, where there is substandard living accommodation, there is that argument that we can allow amalgamations in that respect, but in this case the officer went on site, deemed the daylight sunlight levels to be acceptable, and that the flats were of an acceptable quality. Whilst we appreciate one of them sort of falls slightly beneath the minimum space standards for a one-bed, two-person flat, it can still be used as a one-bed, one-person flat, where those minimum space standards are a bit lower. So in this particular case, officers have taken the view that the living conditions as existing are acceptable and wouldn't justify the amalgamation of the two units.
Just to quickly follow up on that, so if in terms of what meets minimum space standards, currently we have one that meets minimum space standards for a one-bed, two-person, and one that meets minimum space standards for one-bed, one-person. So 3 people can be housed. And what the application is for something that meets minimum space standards for a 2-bed, 4-person. So 4 people can be housed. So the difference in terms of meeting minimum space standards, the application actually provides for the housing of 1 additional person. Is that correct?
Yes, so the total floor space would be 105 approximately square metres, and the minimum space standards for a 2-bed, 4-person for a 2-storey dwelling is 79 square metres. So it would meet those space standards, but in this particular case, officers came to the view that it wouldn't justify the amalgamation of the 2 units, particularly when there is the overwhelming need for housing within the borough.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions before we... yeah, Councillor North.
Are you aware of... this was originally one property, it was been subdivided. Do you know the history of it, when it was subdivided? Was it many years ago, recently?
I don't have that information to hand, unfortunately.
Sure. Okay, happy to proceed to a vote. Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, you know, officers are right in that we do have a policy which is anti-amalgamations. On the other hand, one of the flats is below minimum space standards for a 1-bed, 2-person. So what's actually being provided for here actually houses more people. It's just a shame that policy is very unit-focused rather than people-focused. But for a 1-bed, 2-person, it is below minimum space. And I think generally the overall average living condition would be improved for all the residents. So improvement in living conditions, an issue with minimum space standards versus the policy on amalgamation. So I think that's what we need to consider. Okay, in which case we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to refuse. Can I see all those in favour? And can I see all those against? Right, so it's a decision of the committee to grant planning permission. So I think we need a reason to overturn the recommendation. Is that correct? So, excuse me, in terms of reason to overturn, I think we should probably focus predominantly on the fact that one of the flats is below minimum space standards and is an overall improvement in living conditions by the fact that they have more natural light in the living areas, etc. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, excuse
yes.
me. I think I just need to bring to your attention the subtext of the policy with regards to the space standards, and maybe err on the side of caution in going down that particular avenue and maybe focusing on the living conditions, because the policy subtext specifically references that it has to be significantly below the space standards of a studio. So that's the one bed, one person, and this one doesn't fall below that standard.
So you'd recommend to focus on improvement in living conditions?
It's up to you, but I would, just because this is a new policy of the local plan and we're going against it and setting precedent, it might be useful for you to consider the wording of the subtext at this point.
Well, I'm happy to focus on living conditions. Is it worth mentioning, can we mention also the fact that it allows for the housing of more people? Because I think that should be relevant, but I don't know whether it is in terms of policy.
The policy doesn't specifically relate to that point, so it might, it's obviously up to you.
Okay, well, I mean, no one's, I don't think this is ever going to be challenged, but it is important to get it right. So focus on living conditions, and what do you think about the addition of people? It seems that probably, unfortunately, it can't be included.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to go down living conditions, Chair, that would apply to every single basement flat in the borough, so we are creating a problem for ourselves, actually.
Or an opportunity. Or an opportunity. Right, well, we'll focus on living conditions then. I'm happy to propose that. Can I have a seconder? Councillor North to second. So can I see all those in favour? All those against? So that's 3 in favour and 1 against.
Great. Are you happy for us to just apply conditions that we believe would be appropriate, such as plans, time limit?
Yeah, all the sort of standard conditions. Yeah, happy with that. Okay, fantastic. Right, we move on to the next case, which is 353 Portobello Road.
Thank you, Chairman. This application also seeks the amalgamation of 2 residential units into an enlarged unit. So the property relates to Flat 1 and Flat 2 located at 353 Portobello Road. This comprises a commercial unit at ground floor level and residential units above. The existing floor plans can be seen on this slide. So I draw members' attention to the colouring of the first floor unit in this pink shading, which is known as Flat 1, and then the second flat, which is located at 2nd floor and 3rd floor level, shown in the green shading here. The existing floor area of the first floor flat is 43.2 square metres, and the existing floor area of the 2nd and 3rd floor flat is 63.2 square metres. The proposal is to amalgamate the units to create an enlarged single residential unit which would measure 106.4 square metres. The officer's recommendation is to refuse planning permission, as it would negatively impact the housing delivery within the borough, and therefore is contrary to policy HO1 of the adopted local plan.
Thank you very much. And we're joined by Mr. Mouzarides for the applicant. Thank you for joining us. You have up to 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. So the planning application to amalgamate was the 2 flats to 1 house was validated by the borough's planning department on the 16th of July. That's 14 days after receipt. Since validation, the application was published on their website. 13 nearby owners were notified. The application published in the local gazette, and a notice was placed on site, and no one has objected. On the 9th of August, I received an email from Miss Alice Culver of the Planning Department. In it, she formally accepts that my application conforms to Local Plan 2019, which is what I in fact designed it to. She goes on to inform me that following the adoption of Local Plan 2024 on the 24th of July, amalgamations are no longer supported, and she will be recommending refusal of the application, even though it falls within the timeline before the new local plan was adopted. That's like serving me a parking ticket weeks after deciding to implement parking charges. It's neither fair nor reasonable. Mr. Terence O'Sullivan, the previous owner of the building for the past 40 years, confirmed in writing that he converted the house to 2 flats in 1982 for the benefit of his mother, an artist that used the ground floor commercial space as her studio, and his stepson and family. Mr. O'Sullivan's mother died in 2018, and soon after his stepson moved elsewhere. Both flats have been vacant ever since around about 2022. The ground floor commercial space has also been vacant for almost a decade. Furthermore, Mr. O'Sullivan confirms that he never rented the flats commercially, and yet the single reason given for recommending refusal is that the proposal would result in the net loss of a residential flat of good size and living standards, which would negatively impact housing delivery within the borough. Clearly, the flats are just a statistic to the borough. In point of fact, they have never been part of the borough's housing delivery. They have always been occupied by the same family, and for an average period of 4 years until recently purchased, the entire building was unoccupied. So, here's the problem. The planning department are prioritising policy over people with no genuine consideration whatsoever for the new owner's aspirations for the building. My client, renowned photographer Debbie Trelaw, purchased the property in March this year as a family home and a gallery to display her work. She has no intention of renting out any of the space in the building. Is Miss Trelaw, having spent upwards of £2.4 million to date, supposed to modernise 2 flats for her family to live in separately? Would anyone here accept this? I understand the need for planning policies. I've worked with many, but determining applications that adversely affect people's lives should be properly considered, not reduced to a box-ticking exercise. Enforcing one-size-fits-all policies without due consideration for how they impact ordinary people's lives cannot be right. In truth, the borough is not losing 1 flat. It will lose what is currently a long-term vacant, slowly deteriorating building and gain a fully occupied family home with a gallery at street level. So I ask you, please, to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as you said, there are no objectors. So, colleagues who would like to ask a question? Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. Question. You said the ground floor has been empty for decades.
Sorry, apologies. I understand from some of the local residents that it has been unoccupied for a number of years. Okay. I don't know, I didn't say decades, but I know it's been unoccupied for a number of years.
All right, maybe 1 decade, I just increased them.
Yes.
So what is the view, what's if it hasn't been used, is the intention to use it commercially?
Yeah, well, my client is a photographer. She's a very well-renowned photographer, and she proposes to use the ground floor as a gallery to display her work.
Okay.
But she wants the floors above for her family to
live above the shop, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
And that has to be a great benefit for Portobello Road, surely.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I just have a quick question, just to clarify. You're saying that the granting of this application is needed to bring the investment necessary to bring these properties back into use?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the other question I just had was on just to get a bit of clarity, what's labelled as a loft room currently in the upper flat. And I'm just wondering what a loft room is, because if it was a bedroom, then that would be a 2-bed, which I think actually wouldn't meet the minimum space standards for a 2-bed. But a loft room could be anything. So Could you just tell us a bit more about what the loft room is?
Well, it is precisely that. It's a bedroom with I don't think there's a bathroom there at the moment, but I think that my client's proposing to put one in. But it's just literally a loft space. I mean, the building itself needs to be brought up to current regulations anyway. The way that it was converted in 1983 was very mediocre. But my client's proposing to invest a lot of money in this. It's her family home. And if she can't live there, you know, in one unit as a family, then what is she to do?
Thank you. That's helpful. Colleagues, any other questions? No. Okay. In which case, move to questions to officers. So, the first question I had is on the. So we've heard from the applicant that the current properties don't meet current standards. They're vacant, and in order to bring in the investment to get them up to standards, make them livable, make the ground floor usable as a commercial space, they need this flexibility. What weight can we give that?
Thank you, Chairman. So, in your assessment of this application, the application has been and will be assessed as a departure from policy. So what members need to consider is whether there's a material consideration to indicate a decision otherwise than in accordance with the development plan. So members need to identify what that material consideration is. Officers have taken the view, as set out within the report, that there aren't any material considerations which would be given such weight that would outweigh the departure and the conflict with the development plan policy. But members may wish to give weight to the matters discussed this evening.
So just to clarify then, it is a consideration, it is a fair consideration. Officers have decided it doesn't outweigh the negatives, but it is something that we can take a position on how much weight we want to give it, as in it is a reasonable consideration.
But, excuse me.
Sorry, my apologies, we can't go. We've moved to the next section of the meeting, so we can't go back. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
So you're correct, members it is a consideration that you can take in the round of the planning balance. The only thing that I would suggest is that at this stage, in terms of the evidence provided with this application, we haven't got any details to suggest that the only way that ground floor area is viable is to amalgamate the units above. That information has not been provided to date.
Colleagues, any other questions? No. Okay. Well, we move on to a decision. I mean, we've heard, I think, most of the salient points. We have existing properties which are vacant. You know, we haven't heard from any objectors because there aren't any, but we've heard the applicant say that in order to bring them up to standards, up to modern standards, they need the flexibility to re-amalgamate what was once one apartment. On the other hand, it is against policy. Rather, there is a policy against amalgamations. That's quite clear. I mean, there's also the discussion around minimum space standards. So the lower flat is below minimum space standards for a one-bed, two-person, but within minimum space standards for a one-bed, one-person. The upper flat really depends. You know, we've heard that the loft room is used as a bedroom. Then again, it is on the plans as a loft room. So, but if we did consider it to be a two-bed, then that also wouldn't meet minimum space standards. So, but perhaps the more important consideration is around overall living standards and bringing the investment in to bring those up to living standards and back into use. So we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to refuse. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? So planning permission is granted. So as with the previous case, I suggest that the reason is around improvement in living conditions, bringing the space up to modern standards. So I'm happy to propose that. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Idris to second. Can I see all those in favour? All those against? So that's 3 in favour, 1 against. So we adopt that as a reason.
Sorry, Chairman.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just to check the conditions that would be attached. I believe it would be the standard time condition and compliance with the approved drawings. I don't feel there'd be any other conditions necessary.
Okay.
So just wanted to draw your attention to that.
Thank you. Yes, very happy with that. So those are all our speaking cases, but we have a few more to get through. So we now proceed to 136 Oxford Gardens.
Thank you, Chairman. I will draw members' attention just quickly to the addendum report. This application relates to 136 Oxford Gardens and seeks the construction of a garden room in the rear garden. I have no slides to present to members as part of this presentation. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to double check one thing, am I right in saying that with the revisions made to the design of the structure, it now fits within the stipulations of the neighbourhood plan around size of outbuildings? Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you, Chairman. So the footprint and the height of the building was revised as part of the application. So it now complies with policy C6 of the St Quintins and Woodlands neighbourhood plan.
Thank you very much. And the other question I had around was materials. So I know we do have a condition in already that touches on materials, but sort of what I'm concerned about is introducing a sort of new material, sort of concrete/cement, into this conservation area, where that material, you know, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but it's not typical of the area. Is there any way we could maybe tighten up that condition, or maybe we just, see if colleagues agree with me. I think it shouldn't be cement, it should be appropriate materials, whether that's timber or other matching materials of the conservation area. General agreement, yeah. So maybe that's just a steer, that we don't want it to be we don't want a dominant concrete looking structure. We want it to be more sympathetic.
Yeah, so you could, members could either add a condition for details of the materials to be submitted to the local planning authority and approved in writing. That way officers could check what those materials would be. Another way to do it would be to add more of a compliance condition to say that the outbuilding hereby approved shall be constructed of timber, or whichever material you felt would be best suited.
Well, I think probably without, you know, detailed photos of the surrounding area, I don't want to sort of go out on a limb and say exactly what materials. I just think we want to make sure it is sympathetic and it shouldn't be a sort of dominant concrete looking structure.
Agree. So perhaps we add an additional condition then for the materials to be submitted to us. I could also recommend that we include an informative to suggest that a cement wouldn't be suitable.
Happy? Colleagues happy with that? Yeah, great. Thank you. Any other questions on this one? No? Okay. In which case, we proceed to a vote with that additional condition we just heard. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous, and planning permission is granted. We now proceed to 152 to 154 Cromwell Road.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, again, draw members' attention to the addendum report. Specifically with this application, the additional recommended condition which seeks to restrict the hours of illumination. The application before members seeks advertisement consent for the addition of a shroud at number 152 to 154 Cromwell Road. The officer recommendation is to grant the advertisement consent subject to the recommended conditions set out in the officer's report, but also that additional condition referenced in the addendum report. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking for it. Can you inform us what the recommended hours of illumination are? I think I found it. 22. So it's, the illumination is turned off between 2200 hours and 730. 730
Correct.
hours.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, colleagues. How do we monitor brightness? Is that part of the proposal, the number of lumens?
Yes, so we have got recommended condition 7, which references the brightness limit, and that is that the maximum brightness for the illumination shall not exceed 300.
Okay, yeah, happy with that. And sorry, can you remind me, is this one, is the application for 12 months or 8 months? 8 months. And do we think that that's not an excessive period of time for the works that they need on this site?
Thank you, Chairman. So you're correct, this application is for 8 months, so it will be a temporary shroud. Condition 6 ensures that it's removed at that time, so that it's only permitted up until the 25th of April 2025. Officers have considered that that is an acceptable time in relation to the works that are going on at site. If for any reason it needed to be put up for longer, they would need to come in with another application, and officers and members would consider that at that time.
Excellent. Happy? Yeah. Okay. In which case we proceed to a vote. Recommendation is to grant, along with those conditions we just heard. Can I see all those in favour? So permission is granted unanimously. So we now proceed to 225 to 231 Kensington High Street.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, just draw members' attention to the addendum report. The same condition that was been recommended for the previous application members just considered has been included on this application. So there's that additional condition in relation to the informative. The application again seeks the erection of a temporary shroud wrap to be located at 225 to 231 Kensington High Street. The shroud would be for a temporary period of time for 12 months, and that is in connection with the application that was granted in 2022 for an upwards extension and the reconfiguration of the building. Officers' recommendation is to grant advertisement consent as set out within the officer's report, subject to those conditions and the additional condition in the addendum report. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Do we know, this is not a retrospective application, is it? Do we know if it's already been installed?
I wasn't aware of it being retrospective, but I haven't been down that side of Kensington High Street today, so I'm not too sure.
The view of the committee is that it is already up. So when would the 12 months start from when it was erected or from today?
So the 12 months would be from the date of the decision. Okay. So from today, or yeah, when it's processed finally, yeah. So, but we weren't aware of it being retrospective, so I believe that you're still able to make a decision on it.
Sorry? No, it's not renewal. It's just they put it up early. Yeah. I mean, we could ask if it's possible to grant it for 9 months instead of 12, or maybe it's getting a little bit picky. Okay, all right. Okay, well we'll leave it as is, but it's got that illumination clause on that we had on the previous one. The illumination to be turned off between 2200 and 730 hours. Any other questions or proceed to a vote? No? Okay. Recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimously granted. So we now proceed to the Great Hall at the Town Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application relates to the Great Hall at the Town Hall and seeks the installation of a green wall. Officers are recommending approval subject to the recommended conditions as set out within the officer's report. I haven't got any other additional slides or photographs to show you as part of this presentation, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Denkade.
Thank you. I've been reading a lot about the fire safety risk of green walls. There have been some really awful fires, and are we introducing fire safety hazards onto our magnificent Basil Spence town Great Hall is the question. So what materials are being used to construct the planting bits and all the irrigation, do you know? Because you cannot use plastic, and that everybody uses plastic, and they shouldn't use plastic. Because if one little bit dries up and someone flicks a cigarette on it, that's it. It's really, really dangerous. And there have been a lot of fires with these, so I'm just really worried about that. I don't particularly like encasing our magnificent building with the green walls. I think they're a bit dodgy, actually, when you measure up the environmental impact and so on, but I would be definitely overruled on that. But I am really, really worried about this. Can you reassure me?
Thank you, Councillor. Certainly, as set out within the report and also set out within our adopted greening SPD, we have identified that green walls can pose a fire risk, and therefore it is really important to have that as a consideration. Policy CD16 of the local plan requires the submission of a planning fire safety strategy with applications of this nature. That has been submitted and has been considered as part of the assessment. Officers are satisfied that the materials, so I believe the structure in terms of which will house the plants will be constructed of steel, and officers are satisfied that the fire statement provided demonstrates compliance with policy CD16 in terms of achieving the highest standards. It might be that there's separate regulations they have to comply with in terms of building regulations, but I'm not too sure of those myself, unfortunately.
Okay. I mean, I didn't know this was coming. I would have had a lot of questions about the whole concept behind it, to be honest, because they really aren't environmentally friendly at all, but that's too late, obviously. So it's going to be a steel structure, and as far as you know, that gives me some relief.
Would you like to add an informative as to...
Yeah, it really, to really have a think about that, okay. And please don't tell me that the council's fire safety officer has looked over this and it's all fine, because I don't find that very reassuring. I really want some assurance from outside, somebody who is an expert on this. I would like to see that, or have that as an informative, that this has been reviewed from outside. Otherwise, we are introducing potential fire risk to a building which is fire safe at the moment.
So an informative that we recommend that an appropriate expert on the fire risk of green walls reviews the application.
Somebody outside the council, if you don't mind.
Okay, an external expert.
Thank you.
Okay.
We can include that as part of an informative. That obviously wouldn't be enforceable, but we can include it as an informative to kind of push them in the direction of getting it reviewed externally.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else? Yes, Councillor North.
I'm grateful to my colleague for that informative. I'm very happy with that as well. This is something that has been discussed for a long time in the ward and has a lot of interest in residents. I was surprised that there wasn't more people writing in. I know that I'm aware that a third of this is going to go towards our biodiversity plan, and with a ward that is sandwiched between Kensington Gardens and Holland Park, it's something that certainly the ward councillors have been discussing for a long time, so we're happy to see it, and maybe it is the start of a larger thing. Of course, we do remember that the council building was covered by ivy and mysteriously disappeared a couple of years ago, which has been replanted. So anything we can do to green Jubilee Square as the heart of this borough, I think it's got to be recommended, but with the safety included. So I'm very mindful of that, so thank you.
Councillor Idris?
Well, of course, I have to put my 2 cents in. So this is the B superhighway, everybody.
Yep.
And you know, it's you know, the town hall is now a corridor of the B superhighway. So I'm very delighted.
And I think there is a condition in there about minimum 30% of flowers to be pollinators. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, or happy to proceed to a vote? Okay, well, we've added an informative. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous, and planning permission is granted. We now move on to 19 to 21 Pennywell Road.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for approval of details reserved by a condition at the hotel at 19 to 21 Pennywell Road. Planning permission was originally granted for the retention of plant at the rear of the hotel and the installation of an acoustic enclosure. This permission was granted subject to conditions requiring further details of the timber-clad acoustic enclosure. Officers have reviewed the submitted material, which is within the committee pack for members to see, and have deemed that these details are acceptable, and so have recommended that the conditions discharged. That concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions on this case? Right, just going to find it quickly, find my notes on it very quickly. Oh, yeah, there was one objection raised around, I think what the objector suggested was some sort of loophole, saying that permission isn't, once the condition is discharged, that the enclosure, materials of the enclosure are approved, they can then start up the unit. So the condition doesn't say it has to be installed before the unit is started. So are we leaving ourselves open at all there? Can they want? It's a bit of a strange question, but once we approve the materials, can they go ahead and start the device without actually installing the enclosure?
I don't think so, because the way the condition's worded is that the plant should not be operated until those details are approved. So if those details weren't approved and installed around the plant, then that would be enforceable, because it's an enforceable condition. So they would have to include it before operating.
Okay, so this forms a fundamental part of the application. So maybe we just add an informative then to the applicant that what has planning permission includes the enclosure, so they can't start it without installing the enclosure. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, in which case we proceed to a vote. We've added an informative. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's granted unanimously. We now proceed to our penultimate case, 237 to 239 Kings Road.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to take you through the last two items on the agenda this evening. So again, these two, well, I'll start with 237 to 239 Kings Road. This is before members because it relates to a land swap, so it's not within our scheme of delegation. There's no objections or anything in regard to it. It's coming back to you because the local plan was adopted at the time when you'd already granted or resolved to recommend approval subject to the legal agreement, and the legal agreement again has not been tied up prior to that local plan coming in. The addendum report advises on the policies, and the officer's recommendation is that even though the new local plan has come in, it wouldn't direct a different decision. So the recommendation is to approve.
Colleagues, any questions? No? Okay, fairly straightforward. In which case we proceed to a vote. Recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimously approved. So we'll move to the final case, 299 to 305 and 309 Fulham Road.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this one falls into that category of being approved subject to the signing of the legal agreement, and that legal agreement was not able to be signed until the new local plan had been adopted, and therefore it's coming back to you again so that you can resolve to grant subject to the legal agreement based on the new local plan policies. Officers have conducted that assessment of the new policies versus the old policies, and again would recommend approval of the application subject to that legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No? Well, we proceed to a vote. Recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's granted unanimously. And thank you all for bearing with us on what turned out to be quite a late night.